Metal Gear Solid 4 is my favorite Metal Gear game. That statement used to feel like a hidden confession revealed. These days, the hate for the fourth entry in the series seems to have died down a bit, and this is standard fare for a lot of Kojima games. When Kojima tries to do something ambitious, people are usually unsatisfied on launch, but history is kind to it overall. Metal Gear Solid 4 is a game about consumerism, the war economy, nostalgia, the complicated feelings around creation, failure, and will. It's easily the most emotional Metal Gear game, and it's the most personal game that Kojima had created at this point. I also feel like it's the most ambitious entry in the series, attempting to do a lot all at once. And that doesn't mean that I think it's perfect. The game does have plenty of room for criticism, but it's my personal favorite in the series. This is mostly because I feel like a lot of the elements of the previous games, the subversive intent, the emotional story, and really the change, has all just been turned up to 11. And obviously I can understand why people don't like the idea of Metal Gear Solid 4, because the elements that they loved about the series sort of had to fall by the wayside. But Metal Gear Solid 4 tells a story that is so personal to its creator that the work and the author become almost inseparable. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'll be taking a look at Metal Gear Solid 4, diving deep into gameplay, mechanics, story, and everything in between. If you haven't seen my previous videos on the series, I would highly recommend checking them out. This series is going over each of the eras of Metal Gear and works much better if you've seen the past videos. Rule of thumb, if I start talking about a game, just assume that I'll be spoiling it. It's me, your favorite son, and today I'd like to talk about Metal Gear Solid 4, Guns of the Patriots. Before we get into the video, I'd like to talk about today's sponsor, Helix. Helix offers premium mattresses that are high quality and are shipped straight to your door. And with the Helix Sleep Quiz, their products are tailored to your needs, so you never have to worry about your mattress not giving you what you need when it comes to sleep. Personally, I'm a stomach sleeper, so the Dusk Luxe was a perfect match for me. I've had mine for a couple of weeks now, and I honestly have to say I love it. A mattress is one of those things people say you should never skimp on in life because quality sleep is so important, but mattresses also tend to be one of those things where you didn't know that you needed an upgrade until you got one. And that was the case with me because I definitely didn't realize what a good mattress felt like until now. I fall asleep so fast now, and I don't even worry about tossing or turning at night. I also don't like to sleep hot at night, and the Glaciotex cooling cover is perfect for that. It keeps the mattress cool at night, allowing me to sleep comfortably. Helix makes ordering your next mattress incredibly easy and convenient as well. They ship right to your door, and shipping is free in the US. It also comes tightly packed in this box, just rolled up, and it's very easy to set up once you have it in the house. They have a 100-night sleep trial that lets you test out the mattress to ensure that you'll love it. And if that wasn't enough, they have a 10-year warranty, financing options, and flexible payment plans. Helix Sleep is offering your favorite Sun fans an exclusive discount this month. 27% off your next mattress purchase and 2 free pillows. Use promo code HelixPartner27 and make sure to act fast because this discount ends after Labor Day. Check out the Helix site for more details. The link is in the description. Now back to the video. It's no secret at this point that Kojima did not want to make Metal Gear Solid 4. But to understand this game, we have to start things right. We have to get the fundamentals correct. It isn't that Kojima did not like Metal Gear anymore and wanted to move on to something else. It's a bit deeper than that. Kojima had planned to take a step back from the series for a while. If you remember, after Metal Gear Solid 2, he tried to pass the series down to his team, but that didn't work out so well. After Metal Gear Solid 3, he really wanted to leave, and the director of Metal Gear Solid 4 was originally announced first as Alan Smithy. This was a joke, obviously, as Alan Smithy is a pen name that directors have used in Hollywood when they don't want their name attached to a product. After this, Shuyo Murata was announced as the main director for Metal Gear Solid 4. This didn't go over very well with fans though, because at this point, Kojima had really become a household name among gamers. Plus, the main reason that people wanted Metal Gear Solid 4 was to provide some answers as to what happened to the characters in MGS2. Fans really wanted some semblance of closure. So naturally, they began sending death threats to Kojima and the studio. You know, like normal people. This once again forced Kojima to come back to the series that he didn't want to be a part of anymore. He had created a monster, a beast that he could no longer control. So I have to say, die, Snake, and really end it so I can move on to something else. Actually, it's a game, so even if Snake dies, the game can live on. We have to kill him at a certain point. This was Kojima's intent with Metal Gear Solid 4, to wrap up this series of plot lines and end things, so that this time he could really actually move on to something else. With that being said, I want to make it very clear that this does not mean that Kojima hated Metal Gear. He would actually go on to create 2 more mainline games in the series. He wasn't trying to leave Metal Gear because he didn't like it anymore. I want to make this clear because I see this online a lot. Kojima's original intention after Metal Gear Solid 2 was to leave the series to his team. He had taught people how to make a Metal Gear game, and his intention was to pass things on to the next generation. This is a very important ideal for Kojima, passing things on. That's entirely what Metal Gear Solid 2 is about, but that mission was a failure. After Metal Gear Solid 2, the team couldn't create the next game in the series by themselves, so he had to come back. And once again for the 4th entry, but this time because fans, and assumingly Konami, wanted him to be involved with the series. It wasn't that Kojima hated Metal Gear Solid, it was that he felt like his mission was a failure. It's like having children and trying to teach them everything you can so that they can survive on their own, but then they just won't leave the house. It isn't that Kojima hates his kid, it's that he wants him to flourish without him. And this is really what Metal Gear Solid 4 is about. The game as a whole became about Kojima's feelings around the series and how he couldn't leave it to the next generation or even just a different group of people. Regardless, with this entry, Kojima was planning to finally put an end to things, to wrap up all the storylines from the past, to finish the story of Solid Snake, and to create a finale that would satisfy fans so he could work on other projects. Metal Gear Solid 4 was to be released on the PlayStation 3. This was once again the series returning to its roots in bringing in the next generation of consoles. Everything was upgraded this time around. Character models were looking sharper, the world was looking larger, and once again the team sought to innovate in the realms of stealth and battle. The main idea that Kojima wanted to push in terms of gameplay was taking stealth to the battlefield. And in that battlefield, as Snake, he wanted the player to make choices, to get involved or to stay impartial. You don't have to kill the enemy, but you might decide to. I want people to understand that kind of feeling, killing someone you had no intention to kill. These days, with any FPS, you're either on side A or side B, and you're killing, but my games shouldn't be like that, and that's why I have this big theme. This theme tied back into a lot of the ideas from previous games, relating the VR training that soldiers went through to video games and forcing the player to question what killing games really did to them in the end. Metal Gear Solid 4 continued this theme quite a bit, and it was meant to from the beginning. This was the meaning of the "no place to hide" tagline, furthering the idea that Snake was out of attention on the battlefield, but not out of sight. Kojima also wanted MGS4 to follow a structure that was more similar to Indiana Jones or James Bond, seeing Snake traveling the world, taking a jet to different locations rather than staying in an isolated area. A lot of these more broad ideas came from the freedom that the PS3 allowed the team, but that doesn't mean that they weren't still restricted. The PS3 tech limited them a lot more than they thought, meaning that some ambitions they had during planning had to be cut. Metal Gear Solid 4 was released on the Sony PlayStation 3 on June 12, 2008. Metal Gear Solid 4 actually begins with an install screen. We see Solid Snake, now very old, smoking a cigar while a small progress bar at the bottom of the screen slowly ticks up, and warnings against smoking appear on the screen. This was something entirely new to the PS3. Games on the PlayStation 1 and 2 were read straight from the disc, but with the PlayStation 3, games were larger and prettier. So this meant that installing them to the system drive allowed them to be read faster. Metal Gear Solid 4 was the first game that I encountered this new feature on, and it was quite shocking. As a kid, seeing this screen felt like watching paint dry. I was used to putting in the disc and having the game ready to go. Even being forced to wait 17 minutes felt like an eternity. Now, as an adult, it didn't feel that long. I just walked away, made some coffee, and it was ready to go. Once we beat the first boss, the Smoking Snake installation screen, we can actually play the game. I lied, not quite yet, because before the game actually starts, we're treated to a few in-world commercials from Metal Gear Solid 4. There are actually 5 different channels that we can surf through here, all showing different programming, each with their own small snippet of a show or commercial, and then a much shorter commercial at the end. These advertisements were actually a very large production. Kenichiro Imaizumi was the main driving force behind getting these commercials made. He really wanted to do something different this time around for the game's intro. Imaizumi had worked on MGS3 as a producer, but he was also friends with a man named Alexei Tylovic. Tylovic had founded a production company called Logan. Imaizumi and Tylovic had been friends since school, and the latter was eventually recommended to Kojima. The team threw around a ton of ideas, but they eventually landed on the idea of making fun of television cliches without falling into parody. Alexei's sister actually worked for The Onion and provided writing help on the commercials, which gave them a tongue-in-cheek tone. All of the commercials feel sort of surreal, foreboding, like they signal the end of something or something post. It feels like an epilogue rather than a prologue, but the largest thing that these commercials do is expand the outside world of Metal Gear Solid. This is something we haven't really ever seen in the Metal Gear series. Most of what we can see is isolated to the area that we're infiltrating, but we can't really see what the world looks like, what people are thinking, what they're consuming. Metal Gear Solid 4 takes place after Metal Gear Solid 2. It's a sequel to that game, taking place 5 years after that entry. With MGS2 feeling like the bad ending, the world certainly feels like it's existing in a control state. The first commercial sees David Hayter, the actor and screenwriter, being interviewed on television, certainly breaking the fourth wall as soon as we start the game. The woman here is Lee Merriweather, who plays Eva. This interview feels surreal the entire time. It almost feels like an interrogation or a bad dream. Hayter misunderstands almost every question while Lee stands in control.
Why here, wearing an eye patch?
Oh, the eye patch. This is pretty cool, actually. Gives me real-time information and weather, traffic reports. Actually watching a baseball game as we speak.
Lambasting him or laughing at him for every choice that he makes. He talks briefly about the Solid Eye that he's wearing, a device that allows him to see information directly, like weather or traffic updates. Snake will use this same device later in the game for stealth applications. The entire theme of these commercials is that of rampant consumerism, a world in which products and entertainment have run rampant. They've become a formula. The Solid Eye is a great example of this, a product that has drastic implications for war and the battlefield, but here is being used for trivial information. The next program is a game show. Melissa is the contestant. One more question right, and she'll be able to buy a new RV for her and her husband. She's asked a question about PMCs and gets it wrong. This commercial and the last one have the same feeling. The guests on the show are interrupted. They're almost made fun of in a way. It feels very surreal, like a nightmare scenario. Being on a game show but not being able to talk, it almost feels like it's saying two things at once, that the people in control have no regard for their subjects, and that the subjects themselves are willing to be controlled, a general unawareness of their situation. Hader experiences this in his interview, and Melissa experiences this in the game show, both ignorant to the motivations of the hosts. But the motivations are clear, creating a product to sell to the masses. We are watching the machine, the cogs turn as the unsettling and mostly gross gears of consumerism churn in front of us. Entertainment hasn't even become fun, it's become bland and kind of terrifying. The third show is an educational program about an octopus. This is the one outlier show that almost feels disconnected from the rest. It only stands out in the sort of dry, boring humor that the presenters put forth. The fourth show is a cooking program for the war-torn era. An angry and very serious chef cooks up alligator and tire-pressed vulture, things that could only be found on the streets of a country racked with foreign invasion. This one is also clearly a reference to Snake Eater and the things that we would consume in that game. The final program is a workout show that advertises nanos. The testimonials are probably the most jarring part, with a woman saying that being out of shape caused her husband to not love her anymore, but thankfully, nanos saved her. These commercials sort of cover all of the bases of a lost society. Vanity, consumerism, materialism. It paints a bleak and sort of cold picture of the world around Metal Gear Solid. And maybe we hadn't seen a lot of that world before because it wasn't too different from our own. But now we need to see it because the paths have diverged drastically. After each of these shows, a small unique commercial will play. These commercials are for 5 different PMC companies, organizations that we will get to know very well throughout the course of Metal Gear Solid 4. When the game does actually begin, we are introduced with a text screen. In the not too distant future, on a tired battlefield, war has become routine. Our main character, Snake, is back, Solid Snake this time, riding in the back of a truck, disguised with a cloak, heading into a battlefield. His narration is laid over this scene, and his commentary on war is quite poignant, ready to set up the story that we're about to experience.
It's no longer about nations, ideologies, or ethnicity. It's an endless series of proxy battles fought by mercenaries and machines. War and its consumption of life has become a well-oiled machine. War has changed.
Now, before we get to Snake, where he's at, and specific characters, we have to continue talking about the world of Metal Gear Solid. Again, MGS4 takes place in the shadow of Metal Gear Solid 2. It is a direct sequel, and I always kind of viewed Metal Gear Solid 2 as the bad ending. Though I did make the case that I think most interpret its message as one of nihilism rather than hope, the characters in that game still lost. They failed. The Patriots won in the end. They succeeded in making our characters the pawns. At the beginning of Metal Gear Solid 4, we are seeing the aftermath of this. What has happened in the fallout of the Patriots winning? The largest change to the world is that war has become routine. This is a large theme for the game, one that will be furthered as we play, but it's important to touch on in the beginning. War is no longer about the warriors. It isn't about glory, it isn't about honor, it's about feeding the machine. It's war for the sake of war itself. In ancient times, warriors were honored, they were revered in giving their lives for their people. Now they are expendable. They are more fuel for the war machine. Metal Gear Solid 4 uses 2 very real concepts as objects of its plot: proxy wars and PMCs. These 2 things need to be understood and examined before we can move on, because war is one of the central themes of this story. Proxy wars are conflicts that are indirectly fought. Larger nations will generally back smaller parties to fight their wars for them. One of the most famous examples of this was the Vietnam War. The US was backing South Vietnam, and North Vietnam was being supported by the Soviet Union and China, with the spread of communism as the central conflict. More recent examples of proxy wars are the Syrian and Sudanese civil wars. Generally, these wars involve larger powers using their influence and backing to push smaller nations into conflicts. While the larger nations are mostly removed from the direct conflict, the smaller nations bear the brunt of actual casualties. These wars feel almost inhuman, like leaders playing chess on a battlefield comprised of a real human being. The second concept that MGS4 brings into its world are PMCs. PMCs are private military contractors. They are companies that were originally formed to contract out training to the US government. They were meant to transfer knowledge and techniques from ex-special forces to the modern soldiers of today. But this is not what they ended up being used for. After the attacks of September 11th, PMCs were in high demand in the US and suddenly became boots-on-the-ground soldiers in the Middle East. Their use allowed the US to use a cheaper alternative to US military forces, while actual US soldiers could take on more important tasks. It was also a little too convenient that if any of the PMCs contracted by the US government were to do anything unsavory in the Middle East, the US wouldn't really be to blame. It would fall on the head of the PMCs themselves. Just about every American PMC has been involved in some sort of controversy over the years. The George Scientific Corporation PMC was accused of partying and doing drugs quite often at their operations center in Kabul. AirScan was accused of giving poor identifications for targets in Uganda, leading to the deaths of innocents and children. And most famously, Blackwater has a rap sheet of controversies to their name. Accused of smuggling weapons into the Middle East, incompetence leading to the deaths of innocents, and they were involved in the Nisour Square massacre, causing 14 casualties, mostly comprised of civilians, and wounding 20 others. They even had boots on the ground in US soil during the Hurricane Katrina disaster to protect the wealthy inhabitants of New Orleans against the supposed raging populace of the storm-torn city. All of these companies are essentially groups of mercenaries that governments can use to do their dirty work for them. They've been around for a long time, and even groups like Blackwater are still around today. You just don't hear that name anymore. They changed to XE Services, to Academy, and now Constellus Holdings. These people get away with a lot, and these are only the things that we know about. Because they are contracted by the US government, they're just a third party. Their actions are their own. The government gets off scot-free when they kill a civilian or engage in illegal activities. The world of Metal Gear Solid 4 takes this idea fully. The wars of the world are now being fought not directly by the large military superpowers, but through PMCs. PMCs are hired and they fight the wars for the countries that don't want to be directly involved. They don't want their own men to be killed in the war. They don't have to suffer casualties. It's just another chess piece. And this cruel, unfeeling, distanced view of war is one with its mirror pointed directly at our real world, one that feels all the more real 16 years after the release of this game. And this idea that Metal Gear Solid 4 presents is moved all the further by its idea of a war economy. This is something that we'll get further into as we get into the game, but now, like Snake says, war has become routine. It is no longer special, it is no longer real, it just happens because it has to happen. The people in control now have even more of that all-powerful resource, exerting their force over the battlefield with ID-tagged guns and ID-tagged soldiers.
War has changed. The age of deterrence has become the age of control. All in the name of averting catastrophe from weapons of mass destruction. And he who controls the battlefield controls history.
When the truck that Snake is in arrives to the battlefield, soldiers exit the vehicle to slaughter. Snake makes it through, but his gun immediately jams. We are then given control of the game, and it's honestly worth talking about the gameplay at this point before we continue to move forward. First, to get it out of the way, a lot of the basics of Metal Gear Solid 4 are the same as previous entries in the series. We sneak around different areas, trying not to be seen by our enemies. We can take them out with CQC or use silenced weapons to dispense with them from afar. If we want a louder approach, we can use a variety of regular weapons that will surely pack a larger punch and will take out foes quicker, but will leave us at the behest of a horde of foes. Metal Gear Solid 4 does have its fair share of new mechanics, though, to spice things up. The new Octo camo is probably one of the largest features. This is basically the same camo system from MGS3 that has returned, but since it's 50 years later, the technology will now do the thinking for us. The Octo camo can automatically adjust itself to the surface that we're on, causing us to blend in a lot better and without picking through a list of different options. Of course, if you liked this old system, you can choose to turn this on manual so that you can choose the camo that Snake is wearing at any given time. With auto mode though, when crawling or leaning against a wall for a couple of seconds, Snake's camo will automatically change, increasing the camouflage rating, which, if you remember, is effectively how well Snake is hiding. We also now have the Psyche meter instead of the Stamina meter. This is a little bit more complicated than just Snake getting tired and needing to eat some food. Snake's Psyche meter will go down based on a variety of factors, and it mostly has the same effects as the Stamina gauge. Snake will be a lot more shaky when aiming and will move a bit slower, but in the heat of battle, Snake's adrenaline will increase, causing him to shoot faster and take less damage from the high of combat. This time around, though, we don't need to worry about repairing wounds or cuts. We're back to the old system of eating rations and directly replenishing our health. Snake also has a lot more gadgets this time around. In particular, the Solid Eye is very useful. The Solid Eye is a high-tech device that looks like an eye patch. It can be used for night vision purposes, it can be used for informational purposes, showing us the affiliation of the character we're looking at, whether they're friend or foe. But just like the gadgets in MGS3, it has a battery that slowly drains as we use it. Snake also has access to the Mark II, a device created by Otacon that allows us to scout out areas and even take down enemies. I should also note that we also have an iPod. That's right, an Apple-branded music device is in Metal Gear Solid 4, and we can use it to listen to different songs, changing the background music at will. These songs can be collected through different areas in the game as extras or collectibles. One of the most interesting new features in MGS4 is really only present for the first couple acts of the game, and that's the battlefield system. This is less of a system and more of just something that you can do. During the first couple of acts, we'll be forced to maneuver our way through the battlefield. War is breaking out around us. PMC is fighting PMC. Local PMCs hired by rebels versus PMCs hired by the current governments in power. These fighting forces will be firing everything they have at each other, but that conflict isn't necessarily Snake's goal. He has to get somewhere else, do something else. We can choose to get involved or not. If we just move on past these conflicts, then both of these forces will be hostile to us. But we have the option to actually help out the rebel forces here by giving them rations or by taking down their enemies for them. If we do this, the rebel forces will become friendly, making our lives a whole lot easier. This all ties back into Metal Gear Solid 4's war themes. We aren't here for the conflict, we exist outside of it. These people are fighting because large nations want them to. We need to not get involved, but we can if we choose so. The agency is on the player. The responsibility has been thrust upon us to make a moral judgment on a conflict we know nearly nothing about. For the most part, Metal Gear Solid 4 does have pretty smooth gameplay. It feels like classic Metal Gear Solid, just with a few upgrades. I will say that outside of some story moments, I didn't really even notice the Psyche system. There were a few times where I equipped or used items that would increase my Psyche because I noticed it was kind of low, but Metal Gear Solid 4 isn't the hardest game in the world. It's honestly one of the easiest games in the series overall, and that leads to a lot of tools feeling like they've gone unused. This is in direct contrast to the absolute reliance on the stamina system from MGS3. When we first gain control of Snake, we have to make our way through this war zone in the Middle East. Slowly sneaking through the battlefield and keeping our head out of enemy crosshairs is the goal. Pretty soon, this becomes a lot more complicated because we hear a foreign noise off in the distance as the battlefield is set upon by a terrifying new enemy, the Gecko.
Hit him hard! What?
Gecko are unmanned combat vehicles that look quite a lot like a Metal Gear. These are now mass-produced for the battlefield, used to keep valuable lives out of harm's way and take out the enemies with advanced machinery instead. They are brutal machines that stomp, gun down, and crush their foes. They moo like cows and emit sounds of cicadas. This is apparently a psychological form of warfare that convinces their enemies that they are safe, that tranquility is near, when in reality they are readying themselves for an attack. The Gecko are actually kind of terrifying in more ways than one. In our first interaction with them, we have to just run away. We can't take these things down in open combat, and we aren't really yet meant to. They are incredibly strong, fast, and observant. The sounds they make turn out to be a lot more disconcerting when they come from a machine with oddly human legs. Their half-human, half-machine design evokes feelings of a centaur or cyborg rather than a total machine. But I have to give points to Kojima here for calling the change of war to mostly unmanned armies, as drones are ever popular in today's military strategies, feeding back into the cold, disconnected feeling of war. Snake is eventually seen by the Gecko and is forced to outrun them, giving us the main character reveal that we're used to from the series, but this time a lot more chaotic, a lot more based around survival rather than style. Snake is fighting for his life. He isn't the cool, flashy stealth operative that we once knew. He's broken down, he's beaten, he's on his last legs, but that doesn't mean he can't still hang. Snake manages to get away from the Gecko, hiding thanks to his new Octo camo, and once they leave, we jump back 3 days earlier to see Solid Snake at a very familiar gravesite. An old friend arrives in a helicopter. It's Otacon, and he's brought someone who wants to see Snake, but Snake is a bit more concerned with some recent test results. Otacon delivers these results at first in an almost cold, unfeeling way. He wants to separate and distance himself from the bad news. Snake has Werner syndrome. This is a real disorder that causes people to age much faster than normal. Their life expectancies are shortened because of this rapid aging, and Snake only has about a year left. This is why Snake looks much older in this entry, even though he's only in his 40s. The white petals float through this scene, a fleeting memory of the fallen soldiers that lie in this place, possibly wafting up from the ground to bring Snake permanently into their ranks, to signal his coming end. Otacon tries to keep the optimism high, suggesting they find another doctor, but Snake realizes his fate, and the fox dye that was injected into his system during the events on Shadow Moses Island surely isn't helping. Unfortunately, Naomi Hunter is nowhere to be found. More pressing matters quickly take hold as another old friend, Campbell, is in the helicopter. He's working for a UN committee that oversees PMCs and their inspections. In this new role, he found someone in the Middle East, Liquid Snake. He wants our Snake to track him down. As a brief refresher, Liquid actually died at the end of Metal Gear Solid 1 due to the fox dye virus. But in Metal Gear Solid 2, Ocelot had grafted Liquid's arm onto his body, causing his consciousness to transfer into Ocelot and take over. This transformation was mostly kept back during the events of MGS2 until the finale, when Liquid fully takes over and heads off with a Metal Gear to take down the Patriots, and he's now been seen in the Middle East. Before we move on, we should probably talk about the mission briefing. These are small cutscenes that take place in between the different acts of MGS4. They usually take place on the Nomad, a transport aircraft that acts as Snake, Otacon, and Sunny's home. Sunny is a young girl who we'll talk about more in a bit. At the beginning of each of these sequences, we see Sunny trying to work to perfect her cooking, specifically making eggs. We're also given the title card for our first act of the game, Liquid Sun. Campbell is briefing the two on how war has changed in this new world. PMCs are the hot new commodity, and they rule this new war economy. These mercenary groups have no nation and no ideology. They are hired guns. Developed nations use them, and small countries without armies use them. They are everywhere. In addition to that, a system controlled by the Pentagon has allowed the higher-ups to track every piece of the battlefield. Nanomachines inside soldiers give them real-time data on their systems, movements, and metrics, allowing the men at the top full battlefield control. This is justified by lowering civilian casualties and human rights violations on the battlefield, but all good forms of control throughout history have seemingly had viable justifications behind them. PMCs now comprise most of the forces on the battlefield, making up over half of the boots on the ground. The UN authorized PMCs with a vote, which the US abstained from participating in, effectively voting without voting. This has allowed the US to massively profit from a war economy, now tracked by analysts as an economic activity. Child soldiers are more rampant than ever, unmanned weapons patrol the battlefield, and proxy wars are more common than direct ones. There are 5 main PMCs that make up most of the mercenary companies: Praying Mantis in the UK, Pieuvre Armament in France, Otselotovaya Kavatka in Russia, and Ravensword and Werewolf in the US. These are the largest PMC groups in the world, and it just so happens that all 5 of them are backed by one dummy corporation called Outer Heaven. This is most likely controlled by Liquid himself. It's clear that he's trying to unleash an insurrection, trying to once again create the world that was envisioned by Big Boss, a world in which all soldiers have a place. As Campbell explains this mission, Snake quickly realizes that he hasn't been hired for a classic stealth operation, but an assassination. Campbell wants him to take out Liquid. But Campbell realizes that Liquid will have total control over the world if this insurrection goes through. He will have ultimate power. Because the world is now propped up on the war economy, if it collapses, so falls everything with it. Liquid can't win, and Snake must take him out. Our hero reluctantly accepts this mission, and as we jump back to the present day, we're given our first goal: to make contact with the informants that this information came from, Rat Patrol. As we move across the battlefield, attempting to stay out of the lanes of bullets, we eventually arrive at a ruined building where we are introduced to the Mark II. This is where we get access to this gadget, the Solid Eye, and an operator pistol. Otacon tells us that the rebel troops outside are outgunned and we can support them if we'd like. Gaining their allegiance by taking down a few soldiers and giving up a couple rations is worth the hassle in the long run. We also have to make our way through the underground bases, where it seems like they are mounting another attack. One of the most interesting things that this game does with its war story is having this level of implied storytelling constantly going on in the background. We can follow the progress of these battles, and new information is drip-fed to us through one-off lines, overheard conversations, and just environmental storytelling. While we travel through and reach the other side of this underground base, we eventually come across a strange creature, a monkey that likes to drink soda, and his friend, Drebin. The monkey is called Little Gray, and Drebin happens to be a sort of arms dealer. In Metal Gear Solid 4, as we noted in the beginning, most everything is now controlled either by nanomachines, ID chips, or both. ID chips in guns determine who can use them and who can't. If your nanomachines don't have the clearance for the weapon, that means that you can't fire it. This theoretically should stop enemies from using weapons that are left on the battlefield. But of course, there's always the black market. Weapons do still end up ID unlocked, or illegal adjustments are made so that they can be used. If we find a weapon on the battlefield, we can't necessarily use it right away. That's where Drebin comes in. For a small fee, Drebin will unlock our guns for us so that we can use new weapons. He'll also buy weapons from us that we find on the battlefield and sell new ones to us, or make modifications for the ones that we already have. This is the main system that we'll use to obtain weapons, items, suppressors, etc. from here on out. There's one little problem though. Snake's current nanomachines are old gen. They're outdated, so Drebin needs to inject him with something to get those up to speed. Drebin himself is part of a larger organization of Drebins. Drebin is just a code name. This one is specifically called Drebin 893. Drebin is kind of a middle piece in this whole world. He doesn't care about the conflicts going on around us. He only cares about making money, profits. His actual job is working for Arms Tech Security, which allows him to get access to new ID chips. Otacon doesn't really like him, and neither does Snake, but our spectacled friend suggests that we keep him at arm's length because he might be useful. Drebin is kind of a Gray Fox-like character for this entry. He even shares a similar opening line when we first come across him.
Who are you?
Neither enemy nor friend.
Who are you?
Neither enemy nor friend.
He's something that exists as a gray in a world of blacks and whites. His monkey friend is even called Little Gray, of course a reference to his alien-like appearance, but still fitting. He does the same thing that Gray Fox does as well, relating to Snake, noting that they are the same. After our meeting with Drebin is concluded, Otacon gives us the rundown on war price, which ties back into Drebin. With the war economy being such a large and pervasive system, it only makes sense that each market will have different prices. If there's more fighting happening in an area, the war price goes up, making things more expensive. Less fighting equals better deals. At certain points throughout the game, we'll see Drebin's prices drop, and on certain days of the week, he will give us sales. After this, we have to head to the meeting point for our informants, Rat Patrol. On the way there, we spot a man who is hiding under an oil drum, trying to find a moment of peace to take a shit before he is quickly interrupted and has to run away. We meet this man once again when we arrive at the rendezvous point, but he's now pointing a gun in Snake's face. The scene is very similar to the first time we meet Meryl in MGS1. Now, one thing I haven't talked about that I do want to point out here is the flashbacks in MGS4. At this point, Metal Gear Solid had already tackled interactive cutscenes. A large L1 button prompt might pop up during some cutscenes, signaling to the player that something else can be viewed here. Maybe we will see a different perspective, a piece of information, or see through a character's eyes. But Metal Gear Solid 4 adds to this by sometimes, actually quite often, showing us an X button prompt. Pressing the X button during these moments will allow the player to see flashbacks, Snake's memories from previous games. They are used very often during the first few chapters, and they are present during most of the game, but I think they're used a bit too much. When Liquid is mentioned for the first time, we'll see flashbacks to him. When a character from the past is brought in, we'll see flashes of them from previous adventures. And I understand that at this point, Metal Gear Solid had come out 10 years prior to this game. You couldn't expect everyone to remember every single character. And furthermore, you couldn't expect the average player to have even kept up with or understood the story in the first place, because that's not how most people interact with Metal Gear Solid. That's a valid motivation, trying to bring people up to speed or signal to them that these characters are not new, that they were here before. And I do think that this feature ties back into the theme of the game, but I think it's one of the few parts that isn't necessary to make that theme work. That theme is one that we haven't really touched on yet, but we'll get there later. Of course, these flashbacks are optional. You don't need to press the X button to move on, but because the cutscenes are spaced around them, if you don't engage with it, then it can feel like there's a big blank space that was made for you to press the button and view these little images. As we enter the next scene, we are treated to callbacks to the original meeting with Meryl, except this guy is even more incompetent and green than she was. After Snake takes him down, Meryl herself appears. She is the leader of Rat Patrol. She was the one we were looking for all along. She's actually now a member of Foxhound. She never gave up on that group and what it meant to her. Meryl is effectively the next generation. We're going to deal with this a lot throughout the game, depictions of the next generation and what it's become. People that Snake has influenced across his career and the effect that he's had on their lives. Meryl was inspired by Snake and by the previous heroes of Foxhound. She tells us as much in the first game that she idolized the group and wanted to become a member. This is directly contrasted with her opinion of Snake now. She is shocked at his appearance. She's appalled by the way Snake looks.
What happened to your face?
When Snake first met her, she was flirting with him. She was smitten with the dangerous and justified hero, but now she is disgusted. This does a lot of things. First, it shows us how much Snake has changed, the direct path towards death that he's currently on. It also ties into a massive theme of the game, that of the Beauty and the Beast, something we'll return to later. At its most surface level, it shows that Snake's days of being a hero are behind him. He is now effectively an old man that has no place in this new battlefield. Rat Patrol themselves are with the CID. They've been investigating PMC activity. During these investigations, they found out Liquid was in the area and that he's with an unidentified female scientist. Snake tries to lie to Meryl and tell her that he's not here to kill Liquid, but she's already heard rumors that an assassin is out to get him. Meryl says that it's almost impossible to get to him anyways because all of the PMCs and soldiers are fully monitored. Their internal data is being collected, blood pressure, heart rate, etc. All PMCs are forced to use this system. If they don't, they are not okayed for deployment. Meryl quickly rationalizes this because her own team is equipped with nanomachines. It allows them to have a better picture of the battlefield, gives them better communication with each other, etc. But just like Campbell talking about the advantages of the system in The Nomad, this shows us clearly how easily people can be sold on control. Most people like to think they are immune to marketing, that they can't be convinced, like some sort of always on, ready to defend watchdog, that their opinions are ironclad. But Meryl's justifications here for the system that's controlling every part of a person shows that as long as there is a reason, people can be convinced of almost anything. This is the control state that Metal Gear Solid 4 is trying to illustrate. This broken and dead world that we're introduced to is one that exists in the aftermath of a total win by the bad guys of MGS2, the Patriots. And Snake thinks that the current system is controlled by the Patriots. It's even called SOP, Sons of the Patriots. Meryl thinks that the system itself is ironclad, that no one can take it over. But if that did happen, Liquid and his 5 PMCs would have even more power than the US Army itself. This entire conversation isn't just about exposition and moving the plot, though. There are smaller human moments here, namely Meryl admitting that Snake was someone she always wanted acceptance from, and Meryl being upset after finding out that Snake is working with Campbell. So it's a little confusing, but Meryl is actually Campbell's daughter, and this was something that Campbell told Snake. Meryl knows this now and has had some sort of falling out with Campbell because he has married a much younger woman. Meryl is not on speaking terms with the man anymore because of these actions. There's also other moments here where we're introduced to the rest of Rat Patrol. There are 4 members total: Meryl, Ed, Jonathan, and a 4th member named Johnny Sasaki, or Akiba. Johnny Sasaki has been a longtime Easter egg in the Metal Gear Solid series. He was named after Hideki Sasaki, who worked on MGS1. He was apparently a slacker around the office, and they decided to include a character named after him as a joke. This would become recurring throughout the series, with the character always having some sort of bathroom trouble. But in MGS4, he becomes a full-fledged character. Unfortunately, the character still has these same frequent bathroom issues. This brings up one of the largest criticisms that people have about MGS4 as a whole, and I probably fall somewhere in the middle on this one. This type of humor isn't really mine to begin with, so it doesn't exactly hit for me, but Metal Gear has always had this type of humor. The only difference this time around is that it's a bit more at the forefront than it is in the background. It doesn't really bother me that much or break the game's story for me, but I can see why some people don't vibe with it. Also, I don't really think it has any real justification thematically or any reason that makes it fit in with the overall narrative, so I'm not going to give you lore reasons why Johnny Sasaki is constantly shitting himself or why this is actually a stand-in for Kojima's trauma. But what if... No, I'm kidding. But seriously, Johnny is presented as a mostly comic relief character, and he can be a bit intrusive during certain scenes. It's actually something that I think the novelization handles a bit better than the actual game. There's basically 4 lines devoted to this intrusion in the main cutscene in the novelization that really just comes off more as a character building moment in the book than it does in the game. As a bit of a side note here, but if you do like the story of Metal Gear Solid 4, I would recommend checking out the novelization. It was the only one that ever had Kojima's stamp of approval, and it was written by Project Ito, who was a very dear friend to Kojima before he passed away in 2009. After this scene, Ed notes that threats have arrived in the building. It seems to have been Akiba's fault. The reflection from his binoculars signaled them. But regardless, it's time for a fight. Before that, Snake and Meryl clear the halls in military fashion, and it's actually really cool to see these two jumping to a fight like this. Something so small and nonverbal feels like a massive bonding moment for the two. They're speaking a shared language that to us feels foreign. We fight the Frog unit, which is sort of a boss battle, but not really because these will quickly become normal enemies. The Frogs are under direct command of Liquid and are all female soldiers. In keeping with unsettling design, the soldiers evaporate when we defeat them and make terrible, almost horrific cries of pain when they get hit or die. We fight off these units throughout the building, eventually making our way into the underground. Meryl gives us Liquid's location and it's time to depart.
What do you think? Is your age of heroes finally over?
I'm no hero. Never was. Never will be.
You haven't changed at all, Snake.
Snake and Otacon talk about SOP after this, noting that the nanomachines don't just monitor bodily functions, but they actually create senses for the soldier. It's like an advanced version of VR training.
Augmenting the soldier's existing experience and psychological fortitude.
But a soldier's gotta have more than that.
The times have changed, Snake. Just like Meryl.
Snake then sees some of the rebels completely wiped out by beast-like mechanical soldiers. We sneak our way into Liquid's base, and Meryl has finally realized why Snake is actually here, to kill his own brother. Before Snake can even get close to Liquid though, he activates something and all of the soldiers in his employ begin seizing. They start to beat each other in anger or run away in fear. This affects Snake to some extent and the Rat Patrol, anyone with nanomachines.
Rejoice! We're not copies of our father, after all. We are free of the shackles of fate. Snake, brother, we are free. Watch, Snake. Watch as I surpass my own origin.
As we can clearly see, Liquid is still fighting to overcome his destiny, his birth, his fate. As Snake stumbles towards his brother, he sees the scientist that he's with, Naomi Hunter, the one from Shadow Moses that injected Snake with fox dye in the first place. She injects herself with a syringe and gives Snake some advice.
Snake, if you won't be a prisoner to fate, then go. Fulfill your destiny.
Snake passes out as the two escape, and Akiba saves the legendary soldier. With that, we've completed the first act of the game. Liquid Sun is mostly about the setup for MGS4. It's establishing themes, it's getting us ready for things to come. It establishes the theme of consumerism, it establishes the theme of dying war, it establishes the themes of nostalgia and beast through lightly peppering them in. It also sets up most of the concepts that we'll be engaging with throughout the game. The idea of the war economy, war price, nanomachines, an Orwellian level of control in the form of SOP, etc. And I don't think Act 1 does too much wrong overall. It manages to suck us in, get us interested in the conflict, introduce some great and interesting gameplay elements, and the drastic shift in the form of the battlefield mechanic, while also ending on a fantastic cliffhanger that keeps us hooked. Act 2, Solid Sun, begins once again with Sunny making her eggs and reciting some strange numbers. Now listen, I'll get into the egg thing later, the numbers, etc. Just give me some time. We need to properly introduce and dissect some other things before we get there. Snake is waking up aboard the Nomad, and we're given the report on the aftermath of Liquid's excursion in Control. Whatever he activated caused a lot of the PMCs that were present to die, whether from shock to the system or just from fighting each other, we aren't sure. Meanwhile, Otacon received a coded message from Naomi. She's currently located in South America and is being used by Liquid to research nanomachines. His ultimate goal here is to control the SOP system. He's using Naomi because she created fox dye, and that tech was used to create the current generation of nanomachines. We then speak to Campbell, who tells us a bit more about the current situation in South America. The new regime is made up of PMCs that put that regime in power and are currently locked in a struggle with the local rebels who are also using local PMCs. Our goal in South America is to find Liquid's base and rescue Naomi. Campbell and Snake both agree that the Patriots must be involved in this. The worst case scenario that Solidus was trying to warn them about has come true. Liquid and the Patriots are now locked in a sort of Cold War. When we touch down at a nearby outpost, Vamp is seen. That's right, the immortal vampire from MGS2 is back and he's working with Liquid.
Snake, could Vamp be immortal?
Not a chance. This is the real world, not some fantasy game.
Otacon is clearly very upset at Vamp still for, killing his sister and all, but regardless, we have to move on. We make our way through the surrounding areas of the forests and eventually get a call from Campbell to introduce us to another member of the support team. It's Rose, the woman that Raiden was dating from MGS2. Apparently, Raiden has disappeared and he only went missing after he rescued Sunny from the Patriots. This is the girl on the Nomad that Otacon and Snake are taking care of. In the aftermath of this disappearance, Campbell and Rose struck up a relationship and got married. It makes a little more sense why Meryl was upset with him now. Rose will help us out in the battlefield by giving us advice if we choose to call her, specifically advice regarding our psyche gauge because she's a psychologist now. Shortly after this call, we get another call, but from Raiden. There's no identification of him on our screen, sort of playing the deep throat role for this entry in the series. He warns us about a large battle ahead, one between the rebel and government forces that we can either get involved in or sneak around. After this, we're met with Drebin, who gives us quite a lot of information. He specifically introduces Snake to the B&B unit, or the Beauty and Beast unit. These are the mechanical beasts that we've already encountered before. Apparently, they are a squad of enhanced female soldiers that belong to the PMCs. There are 4 of them in total: Raging Raven, Laughing Octopus, Crying Wolf, and Screaming Mantis. This mirrors quite a lot of the other introductions that we've had to villainous teams in previous games: Foxhound, Dead Cell, and the Cobra unit. Their alternate name for this mission is actually Snakehound, and they're after our main character because they think killing him will ease their pain. Drebin also gives us information on the SOP system. He says that the Patriots, who we are assuming at this point control the system, are formless, a representation or reflection of America itself. The war economy that was created by their system has become a sort of fill-in for natural law. It's replaced this system rooted in creation and nature. Specifically, the system is made up of 4 core AIs, 3 that exist outside of the main core one, and SOP is a part of this system. It's a little confusing, but basically SOP controls the battlefield, and it's a part of these AIs. That's all you need to know. Drebin also says that if they can fool the system that prevents people from accessing the AIs, they could potentially use it as a place to lay low.
In the internet society, we have net havens, data havens,
Data pagan and a cyber demon.
Liquid must have found some sort of way to interfere with and to take over the system. Snake ends up leaving and heading to a nearby mansion that Naomi should be located at. On the way, he's called by Raiden again, who says that he has been searching for Big Boss's body. A woman named Big Mama gave him the original location of Sunny, and this is him paying back his debt to her. She now has the corpse of the legendary man. Rose also wants us to keep her involvement a secret from Raiden. Apparently, after the Big Shell incident, Raiden spiraled out of control, haunted by his past and his PTSD as a child soldier. She doesn't want to hurt him anymore, so she doesn't want Snake reminding him of their past. When we arrive at the mansion, we find where Naomi is being held.
I knew you'd come. You and I, neither of us can escape our fate.
Naomi is being kept here, allowed freely to do her research for Liquid, but obviously under threat. She tells us that Liquid has been trying to gain control of SOP. It was originally meant to control the battlefield, but it's also being used to control a soldier's senses. The nanomachines help with PTSD. It stops them from panicking in bad situations and can even reduce pain. What we saw at the end of Act 1 was Liquid testing the system to see what would happen if soldiers were released from it. Because the soldiers have repressed so much shock and so much trauma, the moment the system shuts off, it all comes flooding back. Naomi relates this to what happened with Grey Fox. Snake's arrival here is good though, because Naomi wants to examine him. He has been exposed to nanomachines but has never been under the control of this new system. This is both a literal examination of Snake never taking these new nanomachines, but also a figurative examination of Snake's character. Snake has always been a pawn, but has had the free will to act outside of the system. We see this in MGS1 as Snake tries to navigate being used by Liquid and the US government, in MGS2 where Snake is used by Ocelot, Solidus, and the Patriots, but once again tries to pass this free will onto Raiden, and we are seeing it now as Snake is literally outside of the system's control. As soon as Snake undresses, he once again suffers the ire of another woman who is horrified by his appearance. This is no coincidence, but we'll come back to this shortly. At this point, Snake is dying because of a combination of things, mainly because he is a clone. His genes were programmed to be shorter because the people that created him viewed him as a tool, a weapon. They didn't want other countries to get their hands on him, but it's even worse than that. Foxdie is still living in his system, and because his system is breaking down, it's causing Foxdie to break down as well. The virus is now losing its ability to tell who it should kill and who it shouldn't. Because of this, the virus will eventually become airborne and spread to anyone around him.
Snake, the only thing keeping you together is the strength of your will.
How long do I have?
In 3 months, Snake will become a doomsday device. The irony here is obviously that Snake has spent his life and career trying to avert the deaths of as many people as he can, and now his final mission will be to stop himself. Naomi gives Snake a syringe containing a substance that rejects the malfunctioning nanomachines, the nanomachines that are breaking down in Snake's body. He can use this, but it will grow less effective over time. Naomi tells us that she now feels chained in here by her own creations. She actually can't tell us where Liquid is because the nanomachines inside of her have speech restrictions, but his new plan is called Guns of the Patriots. At this point, a group of PMCs storm in and take Naomi back. Snake then has to take out the frog units that are nearby, and we are confronted with our first boss fight of the game, Laughing Octopus. This is the first member of the B&B unit that we will face, and because the B&B unit is so disconnected from everything else in the game, it makes sense to just get their analysis all out of the way at once. I will say, I think the B&B unit gets a little too much flack, and this ties into a far larger point that I'd like to make about MGS4. First, who exactly are the B&B unit? The first member, Laughing Octopus, is an enhanced female soldier with wriggling octopus tentacles crawling out of her head. She has an octo camo mask on that lets her disguise herself as others, or even pieces of the environment. Throughout the boss battle, we go through the loop of shooting at her and then tracking her down in the environment. She will disguise herself as Naomi and even the Mark II at one point. We can call Otacon to confirm that this was not him, leading Snake into the other room. Every member of the B&B unit will have a Beast and Beauty form. After we defeat their first Beast form, they shed their mechanical units, revealing a beautiful interior, and we have to take that down as well. As we do this, they are constantly walking towards us in an attempt to smother Snake into his early grave. The second member of the B&B unit is Raging Raven, who mostly fights us from the air. We have to traverse a clock tower that is being assaulted by Raven and her goons. Baiting Raven into the tower and then firing at her while dodging her missiles will lead us to winning the battle. Crying Wolf fights us in a snowy battlefield. We have to use a combination of tracking, night vision, and our general senses to find her and attack. She will often run away and send a massive amount of frogs at us. And Screaming Mantis takes control of enemies on the battlefield that we have to take down, while also trying to shoot the dolls that she holds by puppet strings. These 4 characters are not the only bosses in Metal Gear Solid 4, but they are the main sort of unit that the game presents. Just like Dead Cell in MGS2, we will fight other people, but these are presented as the main crew. The B&B unit have caught a lot of flack over the years for being boring, bland, and uninteresting villains. Some of this has to do with the way that their story is delivered. After each of these battles, we will get a call from Drebin as he expositions all over us about the boss we just defeated. He tells us their life story and how we liberated them from that, giving them some sort of peace in a final battle. Laughing Octopus was attacked and forced to torture her family while laughing. Raging Raven was captured and tortured while ravens pecked the corpses of her dead friends. Crying Wolf accidentally suffocated her brother while running away from enemy forces as a child, and Screaming Mantis was trapped in a torture chamber surrounded by corpses, causing her to go insane. She was eventually taken captive by Liquid, and they replaced her psyche with the mind of Psycho Mantis, effectively creating Psycho Mantis himself. And I will agree that I think the delivery of these backstories doesn't do much to build them up as characters in Metal Gear Solid 4. Though I think other games have done this to some extent, like the Sorrow with MGS3, it maybe feels a bit out of place here. But I think the design of the characters actually have purpose in the game and its narrative. Let me just get it out of the way now and say that I don't think Metal Gear Solid 4 is bad on purpose. Reactions to this game in the modern day seem to fall into two camps. Either Metal Gear Solid 4 is bad on purpose because Kojima was angry at having to make a fourth entry in the series, and MGS is just bad because it's fan service and trying to bait nostalgia. It's strange because both of these camps come so close to getting to the point of Metal Gear Solid 4, but never quite arrive at the finish line. Metal Gear Solid 4 is not bad on purpose, but there are certain elements that seemingly are made more recycled in the interest of making a point. If you haven't noticed already, each of the B&B unit is kind of a tribute to the previous bosses in the Metal Gear series. Each character has the name of a boss from MGS1, a weapon from a boss in MGS2, and an emotion from a boss in MGS3. Laughing Octopus shares the octopus name with Decoy Octopus, the same tentacles as Solidus Snake, and the emotion of the boss, also explaining the flowers that we see when she dies. Raging Raven shares the Raven name with Vulcan Raven, missiles as weapons like Fat Man, and the Rage of the Fury. Crying Wolf shares the same name as Sniper Wolf, the weapon that Fortune uses, a railgun, and the emotion of the Sorrow. Screaming Mantis shares the same name as Psycho Mantis, the throwing knives that Vamp uses, and the emotion of the pain. Now, obviously, this doesn't excuse anything. Just because something is a reference to past characters doesn't mean that it's suddenly good. It's just a reference. But one of the main themes that MGS4 tries to drive home is that of nostalgia. See, Kojima was tired of making Metal Gear Solid games. He had felt like he failed in passing on this series to the next generation, and the anger of the fans at his attempted departure from the series surely led to some dissatisfaction. So it's not a coincidence that MGS4 is a game about dragging a nearly dead old man back from the grave to try and go on one final mission. And in that final mission, he fights a unit that is comprised of recycled characters, created from the dead remnants of previous bosses. Now, obviously, I don't know Kojima personally, but from what I've seen, I can't imagine that he would make a game bad on purpose, that he would put his name on something as director and purposefully tank it. I can imagine that he would use and channel his frustration into creating a personal story about nostalgia and letting things die when they should, rather than dragging them out again and again and again. Snake himself is a perfect representation of this. He's a relic, an old man that's inhabiting a world of young people who have already moved on from him. Even Meryl, the one that always called him a hero, has sort of moved on from trying to gain his approval. Snake smokes constantly in a world that hates it, that wants no part of it. The things that once made him cool have now changed with the times, with the perception of the world. He's the genuine article, he's real, but that's not necessarily what this world wants anymore. This could be the way that Kojima represents himself in this world, his place in gaming at this point. Snake as a character wasn't even meant to live this long. Naomi tells us this much. This is Kojima, forced to make a game that he doesn't want to, forced to come back out for one big job, forced to rehash the same old things over and over. The B&B unit also ties back into the Beauty and Beast theme that Metal Gear Solid 4 has going for it. Obviously, these characters themselves are Beauty and Beast wrapped into one. They have two sides to their coin, but they're also meant to show us, and maybe Snake specifically, that you can gain some sort of peace before death. that no matter how large of a beast you become or how big of a beast that world turns you into, that you can be pure before you die. Snake himself is the biggest beast in this story. He looks ragged, old, run down. He's constantly coughing because of his smoking habit. Women see him and are appalled, shocked. They look at him with fear and disgust because he is a beast in this world now. I'm sure this also says something about time and the way that perception changes as you age. Maybe even something about the way that the perception of media changes as it ages. Things that were once okay suddenly are not in retrospect, or just that the erosion of the world will make people see you a lot differently. But those are much more loose themes rather than something that feels a lot more central to the whole idea. And this is applied quite obviously to the B&B unit. We judge these characters from the outside, but hey, they're actually sexy women on the inside. The backstories, though, while delivered poorly, are a reflection of the losing end of war. They all come from war-torn villages. They were born out of conflict, born in a battlefield that they could not survive. They are a direct representation of the innocence of war, the people that suffer. In this series, we too often see the badasses of war, the big villains, the big heroes, but these are the others. MGS4 makes a point to focus on the people that don't have a choice in these conflicts. And at the end of the day, I can't ever really know what Kojima was thinking when he made MGS4, and I don't expect him to ever elaborate or spell it out, but that's sort of the point. Kojima's work was always interpretive, and this is what I got from it. And the B&B unit still has practical issues. If this interpretation was the original intention, then you can't expect everyone to get that right off the bat. So, of course, people are going to write it off as lazy. In short, I don't think the B&B unit is as bad as everyone says, as long as we assume that there was justification. It's not like Kojima doesn't have a track record for consistently having reasons for the things he puts in his stories. Also, I can't really justify the whole photo shoot thing. I think that's just Kojima being a coomer. After we defeat Laughing Octopus, we get the face camo. This is basically the same thing as the Octo camo that Snake wears, but as a mask. Snake can now transform his face into another as long as he has the mask for it. These can be used to blend in more at certain points, but they're honestly just collectibles. You can get face camos of each of the B&B unit if you take them down non-lethally. You can get face camos of Otacon by playing the Mark II minigame during the briefing cutscenes. I always liked this when I was a kid because effectively it let the player play an entirely different character just for fun, and that's a really cool incentive to scour every corner of the game. Though there's not that many face camos overall. I think there's like 8, and half of them are given to you during the main story. After this, Snake heads outside to find Naomi. We have to track her through the surrounding areas in a sequence that I actually really like. We can use the night vision goggles here to be able to see the footprints that we need to follow, but multiple things complicate this. First, the footprints aren't straightforward. Sometimes there will be a change of hands. Naomi will get handed off to another group, or someone will leave the group, meaning that the tracks split. We have to determine the correct way to go, and at the same time, the frogs are hunting us in the forest. They can also hear the hum of our night vision, so using it becomes less advantageous at a certain point. It's just a nice little stealth sequence through the forest that feels like a bit of a short ode and throwback to MGS3 in a lot of ways. When we get through the forest, we see Vamp loading Naomi onto a chopper. Snake manages to shoot him, but of course he's a vampire, so he starts to regenerate. The PMCs around us are once again affected by the malfunctioning or deliberate sabotage of the system, but luckily Snake has the syringe that Naomi gave him. Also, lucky for us, Drebin comes in with his armored vehicle at the last second and saves the day, allowing Snake and Naomi to escape. We then have to take part in a shooting sequence, taking out geckos and soldiers that are trying to climb atop the vehicle. After this, the truck crashes in a city street and Raiden arrives to protect the group. If you're thinking, Raiden? That's fucking Raiden? Listen, I get it. Raiden has had quite the transformation in the last 5 years. He's now a very augmented cyborg, and he can do way cooler shit than he ever could in MGS2. Clearly, this was a direct response from Kojima to fans that thought Raiden wasn't cool enough. He really wanted to prove to people that Raiden could be cool. And in some ways, I really like taking the whiny and naive character that was the core of MGS2 and turning him into a complete badass that whirls geckos around like they're yo-yos and he's goddamn Kenny Strasser.
And you know how when a drug addict gives it their all? That's what I did with this.
But at the same time, it almost feels like Kojima compromising a little bit. It feels like the message that he wanted to deliver in MGS2 went over people's heads, and he was sort of forced to make the character another action hero. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the character is meant to reflect how the system can kind of beat you down and change you. Regardless, it doesn't change how actually badass Raiden is, and his actions give Snake a chance to get away. We have to dash through the market square that the geckos are currently assailing. This involves actually confronting geckos for possibly the first time. We aren't taking them out quite yet, but we are given the chance to see how dangerous these things are, because if they kick you, you're done, and Snake is ragdolling across the map. Luckily, we can shoot them with a tranq gun in weak points on their knees and they'll fall to the ground, giving us enough time to run away. When we finally get to the escape route, we see Raiden and Vamp fighting in the street. They have a very long, very cool, and very intimate battle that ultimately ends in a stalemate with Raiden quite wounded. Aboard the chopper, Naomi reveals that her original nanomachine design was used to create Vamp. The reason he can actually regenerate is because of nanomachines. Raiden is badly injured, but before he passes out, he tells the group that they need to find Big Mama in Europe. And with that, we've completed Act 2, Solid Sun. Act 2 is a bit more of a mixed bag than Act 1. It definitely speeds things up quite a lot, but I think it also begins to reinforce some of the major themes of Metal Gear Solid 4. It really hammers home the points about control, about war, about nostalgia, and leaving things in the past. It also has some great action sequences that really amp things up and take the game to another level. With that, Act 3 begins, Third Sun. Sunny is once again making her eggs and mumbling numbers to herself. The briefing this time around tells us that Liquid is now in Eastern Europe and he is looking for the corpse of Big Boss. This is because the key to gaining control of SOP is having Big Boss's genetic data. Naomi says that Big Boss is actually alive, only technically. He's a biomort, basically a brain-dead shell. At the same time, Raiden is also bleeding out in the Nomad. He has a special type of cyborg blood that needs dialysis. Thankfully, there's a place in Europe near where they're heading where he can get treatment. Naomi and Otacon take some time to bond over science stuff. They are at odds on one issue though, and that's Sunny's life. Naomi thinks that Sunny should be outside, that she should be able to have a normal existence, but Otacon wants to keep her sheltered here where she's safe. After Otacon and Naomi almost get hot and heavy a couple times, we're in Eastern Europe. Snake is at a train station, and thanks to his new Octo Camo mask, he can appear as a younger version of himself. This doesn't stop some guards from recognizing him though, and Meryl steps in to save the day. She gets us through the checkpoint and briefs Snake on the situation. There's been a local state of emergency set in place, so the streets are locked down. Our goal is to find where the Resistance is headquartered and therefore find their leader, Big Mama. Meryl is ready to strike Liquid at any time with a big force, but Snake doesn't want her to get involved. She thinks she'll be able to lock the PMC's weapons with the system if anything goes bad, but we know how this is going to go. She begs Snake not to go on his own, but Snake has sort of accepted his fate at this point. He knows what this job is, and he's already accepted it. He's going to follow through.
I'm no hero. Never was. I'm just an old killer, hired to do some wet work.
Once we're done with the situation, we get into the streets of Eastern Europe, wherever, and we have to find the Resistance. Now, I know I'm going to get some hate for this one. Again, hot takes galore in this video, but damn, this part isn't that bad. Okay, sure, it's got some downsides, and it can be kind of annoying, but this whole noir sneaking through the streets, tailing our target thing is kind of cool. I honestly really like the way this looks, the blown out bloom, the color. It just feels very detective. And maybe that goes against what the first two acts were doing. I know it's a bit jarring to go from Middle Eastern battlefields to cobblestone streets, but I kind of enjoy it aesthetically. The only thing that really annoyed me is how tedious the tailing can be if we do lose our subject. Our goal is to tail a resistance member through the streets back to their hideout, but of course, they come in contact with a ton of PMC soldiers. This means we have to take guys out without being seen by the person we're tailing, because we don't want to spook them off, and the PMC soldiers themselves. On top of that, the resistance member dons a PMC outfit halfway through, which allows them to get past checkpoints unhindered, and leaves us in the dust. If we lose the soldier, then we're screwed and we have to look for another one. It doesn't entirely reset our progress, but it definitely sets us back a little bit. I don't mind this section though, and it's definitely not the worst sequence in the Metal Gear series. When we do finally get to the Resistance hideout, we are face to face with Big Mama, who actually reveals herself to be Eva from Metal Gear Solid 3. Apparently she is Snake's mother. When Snake was created, they needed a womb to birth the clone, so she offered herself up. We get a very large exposition dump here that kind of changes a lot of things for the story. Liquid has apparently fully taken control of Ocelot, which we already knew, but he's now in a struggle with Zero. Zero is kind of the real hidden antagonist of MGS4. Apparently Zero created the original Patriots along with Eva, Big Boss, Sigint, Paramedic, and Ocelot, basically the team from MGS3. Zero had used the Philosopher's Legacy to create the organization as he wanted to achieve a sort of unity of thought and awareness in the world. This is what he thought the boss wanted, some form of overarching control. Zero then used Big Boss as a sort of icon, a figurehead for their organization. He was meant to be an idol so that they could control the masses. But the two eventually split paths along the way. Zero wanted more and more power, and Big Boss had resented being controlled. His new idea was to create clones of Big Boss so that he wouldn't need him anymore, further overreaching in his lust for control. This was the last straw for Big Boss, who came back to the US, assumed command of Foxhound, and started 2 coups against Zero, Outer Heaven and Zanzibar Land. Metal Gear 1 and 2 were both the big moves in the war between Zero and Big Boss. After Metal Gear 2, Zero took both Big Boss and Gray Fox's bodies from the rubble. Gray Fox was turned into a cyborg weapon that they could use, and Big Boss was turned into a biomort, a barely surviving shell. At this point, Zero didn't trust the next generation to inherit his ideas, so he decided to set up a network of AIs that could make the most logical decision at every turn. The AIs were called GW, TJ, AL, and TR. They were named after the figures from Mount Rushmore: George Washington, Teddy Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln, and Thomas Jefferson. The core AI at the center was named John Doe. Since GW was cut off from the system in MGS2, the other 3 AIs are making the decisions now. And with Big Boss barely alive, a shell of a man, Eva and Ocelot wanted to free him from this prison. This is where the events of Shadow Moses come into play. This was them fighting against the Patriots to try and get Big Boss back. Ocelot eventually went rogue because he idolized Big Boss more than anyone. At this point, Big Mama has obtained the body of Big Boss. He's basically a skeleton being kept in a van. We then get a call that Naomi has escaped, and Snake and the group are spotted by nearby soldiers. We have to make a break for it by taking Eva's bike and shooting down soldiers tailing us. At the end of this sequence, Eva is stabbed in the same way that she is in MGS3. This time she realizes that she needs to be a mother to Snake, to suffer through for him. We then have to fight Raging Raven before returning back to Eva. Eva says that the van was actually a decoy and the real body of Big Boss is on a boat floating down the river right now. The two escape through the sewers, and I'd like to note here that there originally was supposed to be another section here that would have allowed us to guide Eva through the sewers as she was injured. It would have been an escort-style mission where we defend her from various enemies in the area. This section was eventually scrapped and the map was used for the online mode of MGS4. I'd also like to note that I did play a bit of the online mode for MGS4 in this video. It was actually shut down, but some dedicated fans have got it up and running again through the use of RPCS3, and I would highly recommend checking it out. It's pretty fun, though some people online can get a little sweaty. It can still be a good time if you're interested. And the setup takes like 2 seconds. There's really nothing holding you back. When Eva and Snake arrive at the docks, they find Liquid waiting for them. The ship has already been destroyed. He's already won. Naomi told him everything. She turned her back on the group once again. Liquid reveals that he has GW. It's still functioning even after what happened in MGS2. He reconstructed it and stored it inside of the JD AI, a data haven for a reconstructed artificial intelligence. If he destroys JD with a nuke, he will get total control of the system.
Liquid, you're planning to recreate the Patriots. Snake, we were created by the Patriots. We're not men. We're shadows in the shape of men.
His ultimate plan is to kill Zero, Big Boss, and take over the Patriots. Meryl has arrived at this point to try and stop Liquid, but his control over SOP enables him to lock all of their weapons and shut down their nanomachines. Snake manages to get Big Mama out, but she passes away in the street. This is where Act 3 ends, on this big loss. It seems like Liquid has everything in the bag. He's basically got control of SOP and will have control over the other AIs if he manages to launch his nuke. Big Mama is dead, Big Boss's body has been destroyed, and even Naomi has crossed our heroes. Nothing has gone to plan. This act overall is alright, but it's probably one of the weaker ones in the game. I think from a story perspective, it does introduce some ideas, but it's a lot of exposition. The game isn't quite ready yet to take its themes all the way. The most interesting thing it introduces is the idea of Big Boss and Zero misinterpreting the boss's will. We'll get back to this in a bit, but creating this rift between two characters based on a false interpretation of their hero is a great way to explain and tie in what happened in the previous games. Act 4 begins, Twin Suns, probably one of my favorite acts in the game. We're watching footage that the Mark II captured of Liquid on the boat in Eastern Europe. He's talking about launching a stealth nuke at JD. He needs Rex to launch the nuke because even nukes are controlled by the system and ID locks at this point. If JD is destroyed, then GW will rise to the main AI, and since they're already in control of it, they'll have control of the system. And since he needs a non-ID controlled weapon to launch the nuke, he needs Metal Gear Rex, which is still located at Shadow Moses. Since Liquid shut down the SOP system, there's been a worldwide ceasefire. Raiden has woken up at this point. He of course wants in on the mission, he wants to fix things, and he still misinterprets the things that Snake said in MGS2.
I won't live a proxy life. A slave to someone else's will. I'm a shadow, one that no light will shine on. As long as you follow me, you'll never see the day.
The group now has to travel to Shadow Moses Island. Mei Ling is ready to get involved as well. She's become the commander of the US ship, the Missouri. She's ready to bring her forces there to assist how she can.
He who submits to heaven shall live. He who defies heaven shall perish.
On the way, Snake has a dream of MGS1, and we actually replay the second area of the game, the helipad. Snake awakens, and one of the coolest little shots of the game shows him briefly with his MGS1 style. After this, we're thrust into the wilds of Alaska. We have to make it through the snowy forest surrounding Shadow Moses. We eventually come upon a worn down, destroyed, beaten to death facility, one that we're very familiar with. And of course, as we enter, we hear The Best Is Yet to Come playing over our speakers. We hear audio flashbacks to the Shadow Moses incident all over the place. We can walk along the helipad again. We can see the cameras for the first time again. We can crawl through the vents again and even see the rats noticing our appearance. This sequence is of course based in nostalgia, but I really do enjoy it. It's so nice to actually be able to traverse Shadow Moses, or at least part of it again, to see the veritable footprints that we left on this place, the slices in the walls from Grey Fox, the field where we fought Vulcan Raven, etc. On a surface level, it's really cool, but on a deeper level, Shadow Moses is a forgotten relic. The current conflict that we're engaged in has stakes that are much higher, and the things that we did here almost seem small in comparison. And Otacon makes a point to say that everyone involved in Shadow Moses, aside from Liquid, Ocelot, and Snake, are all dead at this point. Most have forgotten this place or never knew about it to begin with. MGS4 does a really good job at riding the line between good nostalgia and bad nostalgia. Like we talked about before, nostalgia is used to make a point in this game. It's used to further the premise that dragging things out for too long will lead to creating something that's a shadow of the original.
We're not men. We're shadows in the shape of men.
But that doesn't mean that the game doesn't take pleasure in revisiting some memories here and there. It's not trying to say that nostalgia is bad inherently, but it's trying to say that trying to recreate the past over and over will surely arrive at something that's lost a part of itself. When Snake reaches a door that can't be accessed without power, we end up traveling downstairs into the place that we fought Grey Fox. Snake is confronted by a gecko, and we can actually use the Mark II here to reactivate the electrified floor. While Snake is down here, he and Ocelot reflect on their first meeting in quite a touching moment.
It's not conjuring up any unpleasant memories, is it? I was being attacked by Frank Yeager.
Yeah, I remember.
If you hadn't shown up when you did, gives me the shivers just thinking about it. Snake, you saved my life.
Outside, we end up fighting Crying Wolf again and gain the railgun weapon from her. This battle and the beauty's story lead Ocelot to reminisce on his time with Sniper Wolf. There's also a really funny moment here where Ocelot tells Snake to put in the second disc at the same place he would have in the first game. But of course, Metal Gear Solid 4 only came with one disc, noting the Blu-ray disc technology of the time. Of course, there were some games that still needed 2 discs on the PS3, but MGS4 wasn't one of them. I remember this moment and actually falling hook, line, and sinker for this troll. Me and my sister had rented this game soon after its release, and as soon as Otacon said it was time to put in the second disc, our hearts both sunk into our stomachs as we scrambled around thinking that the attendant at the video store had forgotten to give us the second part of the game. When we eventually reach the place where Rex is being held, we find out that Vamp has already taken the railgun. Vamp has set a trap for us, and we have to fight him in his own boss battle. We can take out Vamp with very normal means, loading him with as many bullets as we can, but he'll just come back to life. The only way to actually take him out is to stun him and use the syringe that Naomi gave us to stop his nanomachines from working. Once we do this, Raiden shows up. He and Vamp have their final duel now that they are on an even playing field as far as mortality goes. The game has a really awesome sequence where Snake has to fend off waves of incoming geckos that are trying to blow the place up, while Vamp and Raiden fight in a cutscene off to the side. This clearly diverts the player's attention between two spots. You want to watch this rad-ass cutscene, and in-world, Snake wants to see the outcome of this battle, whether his friend will survive. But you can't watch for too long, else you'll get blasted by a gecko. It's such a great idea and a really cool execution of an interesting concept. Of course, Raiden does come out on top in the end, killing Vamp. His nanomachines are keeping him in a half-alive state though, and Naomi wants to put him out of his misery. She feels as if Vamp represents her past, her sins, what her creations have wrought upon this world. She then tells Snake to stop the nuke and fulfill his destiny, tying back into the speech that she gave at the end of MGS1. She reveals that she was not unlike Vamp. She has cancer and was only being kept alive by her nanomachines. And since she wants to be free of this, she injects herself, dying in the process. Otacon just can't catch a break when it comes to women, man. Otacon has luckily got the Rex working again, and we have to take control of it. We have 5 minutes to get out of the base, while a horde of geckos are storming the place. It's one of the coolest things about this game that after all this time, we finally get to actually pilot a Metal Gear. We're taking out geckos like they're nothing, destroying platforms, blowing the whole place up. It's just awesome. It's Metal Gear doing what it does best, and just making things so fucking cool. And it doesn't stop here, because outside, Liquid has arrived, taking control of a Metal Gear Ray, and we get to battle him. I say get to because this feels like one of those boss battles that isn't a chore, but just an awesome treat. There's not a lot to say here outside of this is just awesome. Getting to see these two machines go at it, and also getting to be in control of that sequence is amazing. After the fight, Liquid seems to have taken his last breath, but he calls something down at that moment. He has summoned Outer Haven, a massive giant warship where he plans to launch the nuke from. This warship slash platform also includes probably the craziest thing ever to be put in a Metal Gear game, which is a Mount Rushmore of Solid Snake, Liquid Snake, and Big Boss. Just absolutely insane. There's something to be said here as well about deifying game characters, and the fact that Big Boss had become a living icon, barely kept alive just for the purposes of status, but we'll get there later. Raiden then manages to stop Snake from being killed, sacrificing himself in the process. As he dies, he remembers a conversation that he had with Rose from MGS2. As Snake begins to lose consciousness, the Missouri starts to fire on Outer Heaven. This ends Act 4, Twin Suns. In many ways, this chapter exists as sort of an ode to MGS1. It's very romantic in how it deals with the first game. We see all these places, all these memories, and it doesn't just feel as if Kojima is showing these to us. It feels as if the player and the creator are both experiencing them together. This is a collective sort of event that we both take part in. And the culmination of this act gives Raiden his second chance against Vamp. It allows Otacon to see Vamp brought to justice. It allows Naomi to have her way out, to find freedom from these machines that she's created, this hell that she's wrought upon the world, and Snake and Liquid have their direct confrontation. Though this is not the end, we have one more act to get through. Act 5, Old Sun. During the briefing, we are informed by Mei Ling that the Missouri doesn't have enough speed to catch up with Liquid's vehicle. They're going to have to cut it close. Liquid has to move into position to be able to get close enough to launch his nuke. At the same time, Snake has to sneak on board Outer Heaven and wipe out GW's programming. This will prevent the nuke from launching at all. Unfortunately, there is a microwave corridor set up outside of where the AI is housed, the only way to get inside. The program we will be using was created by Naomi before she died. She sent it to Sunny, and Sunny finished writing the program. And right before the final mission begins, Otacon tries to get Snake to stop smoking, once again the world rejecting the old ways. Mei Ling is readying the ship, Drebin is providing the crew with some last-minute help, and Snake sets off onto Outer Heaven. As Snake, we have to sneak across the ship and get into an elevator on the other side. Once inside, Meryl has been taken captive and is being controlled by Screaming Mantis, who we have a boss battle with. Once she's defeated, we've taken out the B&B unit, and we get quite a few scenes of Psycho Mantis trying desperately to recreate the most impressive events from MGS1. Meryl and Snake approach the final chamber, but frogs are quickly advancing on their position. Meryl is going to have to stay behind and hold them off for Snake. This is a complete reversal of that role that Meryl has played before. Now the next generation really has inherited the things that Snake created. She is saving him this time around. As we walk through the final corridors of the game, Snake has flashbacks to previous conversations.
Tons of diamonds in force of tension, like these where words are spent, they are seldom.
Why don't we get somebody else? It's our duty.
We see Meryl being flooded with troops, and quickly she is overwhelmed. Luckily, Johnny arrives to save her. Apparently, he never had nanomachines. He was never injected, not because he was a prophet and saw all of this coming, but because he just didn't like needles. Johnny was really the only one that was out of the control of the system. The two confess their love to each other while fighting off frogs, and Snake is barely making it through the base. His nanomachines are finally breaking down, and even the syringe isn't working. Raiden shows up at the last minute, apparently not dead, to save him one last time, and with this, we reach the microwave chamber. The microwave chamber is a long, narrow corridor that Snake has to get through before he can reach the chamber that lets us access GW. These microwaves will surely kill Snake in this process, but in one final act of sacrifice, he decides to give himself up so that all of the people around him can continue on, so that they can live. While this is happening, we get another split scene. At the bottom is our normal gameplay, which just mostly consists of pressing on, pressing forward, with a couple of slight QTEs, and the top is a cutscene split between Raiden, Otacon, Meryl, Johnny, and Mei Ling. All of the people outside that are fighting on, that are helping to enable Snake to make this sacrifice. This paints a pretty clear image. This is what is keeping Snake going, his friends, the people that he's fighting for, everything that's worth saving. When Snake reaches the end of this corridor, he finds the chamber, a field of white flowers being preserved, and the cores of the AIs. This whole scene resembles a graveyard. Outside, all of our allies have been cornered, but Otacon manages to finally upload the virus. But the virus isn't stopping at GW, it's taking out everything. Naomi took a video of herself before her death to explain this. It was meant to take out all of the systems, to allow their country to be free once again. Though this does mean a complete end to the digital era, the information age will be gone. Snake once again loses consciousness and wakes up atop Outer Heaven. Liquid has brought him here. Apparently his goal all along was to free them from the control of the Patriots, to create a legion without allegiances. The two begin to fight and Snake is injected with a syringe. It all ends here. Everything ends with this. These two brothers will have one final duel, one to end them all. This is probably one of my favorite boss fights in the entire series because it manages to encompass everything that final boss fights are in the series, while also paying homage to the previous games. There are 3 phases to this fight, each representing one of the Metal Gear Solid games. Each phase changes the nameplates, their design, but also the names of who we are fighting. In the first phase, we see the classic green and blue health bars, with Solid Snake fighting Liquid. In the second phase, the design stays the same, but we are now fighting Liquid Ocelot. And in the third phase, we see the MGS3 updated beige bars, also with stamina meters beneath them, with Naked Snake fighting Ocelot. Each phase also sees a change in music, the theme from each game accompanying the fight it's associated with. The moves that we use, the camera angles of the battle, all change to reflect the game that we are effectively in. The fight is basically a hand-to-hand combat encounter. We can use CQC on Ocelot, at least in the third phase for MGS3. We can use punches and blocks, etc. It's pretty straightforward overall, but it's just so damn cool in the end. This is what Metal Gear Solid has always been about, riding this fine line between cool and substance. And this fight exemplifies that. Not only is it a badass battle between these two men, eternally locked in conflict, but it's also calling back to and replicating the previous games in the series. It's paying homage to those titles. It's this final sort of farewell, this reflection and thank you. And that's kind of the tone that this whole game has had. I wouldn't really call it a theme, but it's just an underlying feeling that the game has given off. Since this project was meant to wrap up so many stories, it feels like characters are getting their finales. People are dying, they're moving on, things are coming to a head. But at the same time, it feels like the creator and the team are saying, thank you for playing these games. The series wouldn't really get an overt, straight-to-the-point goodbye until the final game in the series, but that's outside of the scope of this video. This game, though, feels so much more emotional and romantic than any other game in the series, and that can really be felt through these final moments of gameplay. In the end, the two are just barely evenly matched, with Snake coming out just ahead in their final duel. Liquid's goal has been achieved though. Chaos will reign, and without the systems of control in place, the world will descend into the Wild West. This is what he thought Big Boss's vision was.
We are beasts, created by man. Unless the light is put out, the shadows cannot be erased. So long as there is light, erasing shadows will do no good.
With that, Liquid is dead. Otacon calls in to say that the group has won. Sonny altered the program at the last minutes. The Patriots no longer control the system, but they are still running, so the world won't fall into collapse.
Maybe it was her way of avenging Olga, her mother. Or maybe she wanted to shape the future into her own ideal image. Or maybe it was just one big defragmentation. Fox alive.
Before we move on to the very long finale of this game, I'd like to talk about Sonny for a moment. Sonny feels kind of like a throwaway character, but in my opinion, she's actually kind of the key to all of this. So who is Sonny exactly? Sonny is revealed about halfway through the game to be Olga Gorlukovich's child. You remember, the same woman that became the Gray Fox of MGS2? She revealed in that game that she was pregnant and the Patriots had taken her kid. This is left as an open thread at the end of MGS2 when Raiden asks about her. Raiden then rescued her from the Patriots in between games, and Snake and Otacon are now taking care of her. And Sunny really represents something larger. She stands for the idea of the next generation. She's a computer prodigy that sometimes even passes the skills of Otacon. She helped create the Mark II and saves the day at the end of the game. She's the youngest character in the game, meaning that the world they are saving is hers to inherit. But why is this important? Well, because like I said at the beginning of this video, Kojima has always been focused on passing things down to the next generation. This was the core idea of MGS2, the one he failed to fully realize, or at least people failed to really get and take in. And in this game, the next generation suffers. They are being robbed of life by the system. Sunny is being sheltered for fear of the dangerous world taking hold of her. Meryl also represents the next generation that Snake comes into contact with in MGS1. She's lost her ability to hope for the world and to believe in something great, plus she's fallen into the system. Raiden is the next generation that Snake was trying to pass things on to, and in MGS2, he really stood in for the player themselves. Now, Raiden has become a shell of a person, only existing to fight and keep fighting until there's no longer something to fight for. All of these characters paint a picture of a failure, but all of these characters will get a happy ending in the epilogue. And this is because they failed to let hope fall by the wayside. Regardless of how dark the world is, in the end, they still pushed through. They were inspired by the beast that is Snake, the beast that, during his final moments, his final efforts, decided to find peace for himself in a redemptive act. But we still haven't talked about Sunny's numbers. At the beginning of every act, Sunny recites a string of either numbers or phrases.
8, 9, 2, 5, 9, 0, 3, 6, 0.
The first act sees Sunny cracking 2 eggs. One comes out all right, and the yolk is broken on the other. The second scene sees her immediately breaking the first and second yolk. The third scene sees her cracking 2 eggs, with the second coming out with 2 yolks. And the final scene sees her cracking 2 eggs, each with normal yolks, and the eggs forming together to create 1. Each sequence actually reflects what will happen in this chapter. This is told to us from the beginning when she says that these eggs will determine if it's going to be a good day or a bad day. The first act has Snake and Liquid meeting, with the villain getting away. The second act has both yolks broken. Snake and Liquid both have losses this time around. In the third act, there are 3 eggs because Snake, Liquid, and Solidus, or at least his broken body, were all present. Yeah, that wasn't actually Big Boss's body, but we'll get to that. In the fourth act, the yolks come together and one survives, signaling the finale of the game. Now, Sunny is also singing numbers during these opening scenes. The first time she sings random numbers, the second time she sings numbers that are a part of the Fibonacci sequence, the third time she sings elements from the periodic table, and the fourth time she sings random Japanese names that have been present in the series before. Now, I couldn't really make heads or tails of this. Sure, it could just be a little Easter egg, something small put in there, but if it was, I don't think such significance would be made out of it. I have found one interpretation online that I think fits the narrative of MGS4 pretty well. I'd like to give full credit here to Reddit user Flash Medallion, because I did not arrive at this conclusion by myself. I'm actually not that smart. The things that Sunny is singing are all sequences. First, a pretty simple sequence with nothing tying it together, then a more complex sequence, then an even more complex sequence, and then a sequence that's seemingly incomprehensible. This string of sequences mirrors the games themselves and ties back into what MGS4 is trying to say about stringing things along, about the churning machine of media, nostalgia, and playing things out far past their expiration date. And this is just another tick on the list that shows and details Sunny's importance to the story. She is the next generation, and the next generation has potential. Even Otacon notes this at the end. He doesn't clearly know her intentions because she's allowed to make her own choices. We can pass things on to the next generation all we want, but at the end of the day, the world is theirs to inherit. They will do with it what they please, and our job is only to tell them what we felt was important, not to force them into something that we think is meaningful. Before we get to the end of this section, there's one pretty big epilogue here. The last string of cutscenes is actually the longest continuous cutscene in video game history, totaling 71 minutes or just over an hour. But don't worry, we won't take that long. The epilogue starts on Meryl's wedding. Basically, everyone is present except for Snake. Meryl and Campbell have patched things up at this point, and he's here to walk her down the aisle. Raiden is in the hospital, and Rose even gets her ending with Jack. She tells him that the marriage to Campbell was fake. They only did it to protect Jack and Rose's child. She had a kid after Raiden disappeared, and they wanted to keep the child away from people that would think it's his. We then cut to Snake, who's in the same graveyard that we saw at the beginning of the game. He gives a heart-wrenching monologue.
Our war is over. But there's one more thing I must do. One last punishment I must endure. Erase my genes. Wipe this meme from the face of the earth.
Snake has to take himself out. He has to take out the nuclear weapon that he has become. Shortly after this, we see a conversation between Otacon and Drebin. Drebin was never an employee of AT. He was actually employed by the Patriots. He was ordered to back Snake because Liquid's plan was to take out the Patriots. Liquid winning actually ended up going against their efforts. But now the Patriots have no control over them. Drebins are free to do as they please. Even though the Patriots are gone, though, there are still systems of control present. Drebin specifically references the UN. Humans will never leave these systems entirely behind.
Uncle Hal, when is Snake coming back?
Snake. Is sick. So he went on a trip to help him get better.
We're not going with him?
No. He needs to be alone.
The scene then cuts back to the graveyard. Snake couldn't pull the trigger. Someone else shows up. It's Big Boss. He wasn't actually on the boat. His body never burned up. That was just a ploy to fool them into thinking they got the legendary soldier, but they did not succeed. Big Boss was actually trapped under the AI JD and couldn't be released until the system was destroyed. We also learned that Otacon had used nanomachines to trick himself into thinking that he was Liquid. Liquid's consciousness wasn't actually taking over his body. He had just used tech to convince himself that it had. This fooled the system into thinking that he was actually Liquid, allowing him access. Big Boss then talks about Zero, who, if you remember, is his arch rival. Zero could never have foreseen what would happen with AIs. The AI ran rampant in the interest of making things more efficient. This led to the war economy and made the world dependent on it. Big Boss has brought Zero here and wants to take him out. With his death, the Patriots will officially be done for. But Big Boss is dying too. The Fox Die in Snake was used to take out his father, and it's already in him doing its damage. Snake actually had new Fox Die put in him at some point, and it's now mutating and taking out the old version. Soon, all of it will be gone. He won't become this nuclear weapon that he was supposed to.
In the end, they're no more than a program. Oh, all they can do is repeat the same pattern over and over again.
Liquid, Solidus, and Big Boss all fought to free themselves from structure and systems, but they never met those goals. Who's to say, though? Maybe they were free men because they did what they wanted. But isn't Snake the freest man there truly is? Fighting for what he believes in at any moment, going against the grain if that means doing what's right, even willing to sacrifice himself if it means saving the people around him. Regardless, Big Boss dies here, and with him, the old evils have gone from this world. This scene is just so damn emotional overall. Big Boss and Snake finally getting to meet again after all this time. the man that he was created from, but that wanted absolutely nothing to do with him. It's a classic dramatic interpretation of a father-son dynamic, and this dynamic is even deepened by the fact that in the Japanese version of the game, the voice actors are actually father and son who had an estranged relationship for a long time. This anecdote / story does get a bit exaggerated because the way that I originally heard it was that they hadn't talked for years before Kojima brought them together to record this scene, and it brought them back together, but from the research that I did, that isn't exactly true. It's still pretty powerful though, because you do get that dynamic in the recording. That realism is felt in the lines rather than simulated. After the credits, Snake and Otacon are talking. Since Snake is no longer a danger to the people around him, he can spend these last few days in peace.
You said it yourself, Snake. There's nothing inside you can pass on to the next generation. No genes, no memes. You're man-made. You're a beast.
I know. A blue rose.
Come quick! They're ready! They look yummy! Sort of like the sun. It's rising again.
Snake gets to live out his last days as he wanted to, with Sunny and Otacon, the people that he cares about. No missions, no wars, no battlefield, just happiness. And in the end, for as bleak and dark as Metal Gear Solid 4 makes itself seem, it actually ends on a high note, a happy ending. Kojima always seems to do this. I don't know if the man is actually capable of making a game that doesn't have some sort of silver lining in the end. Metal Gear Solid 3 probably has the saddest ending, but it's still a positive. The heroes still win in that situation. But before we move on, let's take a quick look at MGS4 as a whole. The reason that I love this game so much is because I think it's incredibly ambitious. It tries to articulate something that I don't think is inherently very easy to convey. This idea that we should let things die, that we should let things cease, leaving on a high note, is sort of foreign to most people. And if you want to talk about Kojima being ahead of his time, here's one of the best examples. Because as the modern media machine goes, it just profits off of bringing back any old idea that anyone had even the slightest bit of fondness for, dragging it back out of the grave to give it one last hurrah and get those applauses from the audience. I mean, hell, as I write this script, Deadpool and Wolverine is the biggest movie at the box office, a film that completely plays on nostalgia and references as its main draw. These things are incredibly common today, and part of the blame lies on the studios and creators that let this stuff fly. They've set a precedent. They don't know when to say no to an audience, and some of that blame is expressed here in Kojima's own game. It begs the question, was Kojima satisfied with Metal Gear Solid 4? And I would like to think so, but we can never really know. Kojima isn't exactly the type of developer to talk specifically about themes or things that he meant for his games. Maybe small tidbits here and there, but he also isn't even really the type to do that many interviews in the first place. We won't have a definitive answer on what Metal Gear Solid 4 meant to Kojima. We can really only determine what it means for us. And while the game truly feels like the finale the series deserved, one final hurrah while the sun is rising, this wasn't quite the end of the series. Kojima wanted to go back and revisit an old idea to try and perfect it this time around. Wait, don't go just yet. I wasn't quite done talking. There's two more games that I need to talk about before we move on to Metal Gear Solid 5. With MGS3, we didn't quite get the full story of Big Boss. I mean, we got the origin story, but how exactly did he become a villain? How did he go from saving the world in a jungle to setting up Outer Heaven as a coup against Zero and the Patriots? How did he get to the point where he's fighting his own son? This was a massive gap in the timeline from 1964 to 1995. In Metal Gear Solid 3, Naked Snake became Big Boss, but in reality, he's not really the big boss yet. Eventually, he's going to become the enemy of Solid Snake. I want to tell the story of how Big Boss began and what changed him. So this is what Kojima wanted to do. He wanted to tell this story. How did it all go so wrong? And this would happen in a title called Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, released on the PSP in Japan on April 29th, 2010, in the US on June 8th, 2010, in Australia on June 17th, 2010, and in the EU on June 18th, 2010. Even though this game released on the PSP and it was not a numbered title in the series, don't go wrong thinking that it was not canon or that it was not important to the story of Metal Gear Solid. It's the only non-numbered game in the series that is actually canon. This is mostly because Kojima directed this game himself. This effectively was not really a spin-off title. It took the ideas that Portable Ops were trying to implement with its design and perfected them, creating something incredibly unique and interesting, especially for the time. The game begins as we're in the shoes of Naked Snake once again. This story takes place in 1974, 10 years after the events of MGS3. After a short tutorial on the beach, Snake and Kazuhira Miller are meeting someone named Galvez, a scholar working for the Costa Rican government. Costa Rica has no army, and armed forces are actually moving in on it currently, terrorizing the local people. Galvez believes that these are CIA people that are invading their country. Snake and Kaz have created an organization called MSF, or Military Sans Frontiers. He wanted to hire their organization to take out these CIA men. Snake doesn't really want to accept this job at first, but he reluctantly agrees after meeting Paz. Paz Ortega is a young girl who stumbled upon the group's facility after looking for her friend who was captured. It seems like Snake is really doing this for her rather than the job itself. Snake has a suspicion that Galvez is working for the KGB. If they take the job and it is CIA on the other side, they'll have no home to go back to. Galvez confirms these suspicions. The KGB's target is Central America. The KGB is currently using the Sandinista National Liberation Front, SNLF, to help them in their efforts. The CIA obviously has something else planned, but they aren't sure what. Snake isn't even fully convinced until he hears the cassette tape that Galvez found. It has the voice of the boss, as if she's still alive somewhere nearby. This convinces Kaz that this is a trap, but Snake decides to do this for Paz, for peace. Peace Walker shares a lot of similarities in terms of gameplay with Portable Ops. Rather than being a straightforward stealth game about making it through linear levels and getting to the goal, the added element of building up a base is there along with it. Galvez gifts MSF an offshore plant, which the group decides to call Mother Base, and our goal is to expand this base, collect soldiers, and get operations started. And this turns out to be a lot more intricate than Portable Ops. Rather than running around dragging enemies to a truck to take them back to our base, we use the Fulton balloon system to extract them. As long as they're knocked out, we can extract them back to our base, gaining another soldier in our ranks. This is another addition to the stealth gameplay aspect, incentivizing sneaking rather than going in head first. If we kill enemies, then we won't be able to extract them and use them in our own organization. Each soldier has their own stats, their own proficiencies. What department they'll fit best in is determined by their natural abilities. There are 5 units that the soldiers can be assigned to. The combat unit will automatically generate GMP, which is the currency in this game. We can use this currency to create and research weapons and equipment. This also helps us upgrade those same weapons and equipment. And this is pretty important because a rank 2 and a rank 3 weapon will make all the difference in the world when it comes to dealing damage. The combat unit is also used to send soldiers out in the field on their own missions for extra GMP. The R&D team is the one that actually allows us to develop the weapons. The R&D team needs to be at a certain rank for us to even have the ability to upgrade or develop new equipment. The mess hall unit raises morale, which if high enough actually enhances the stats of all of our soldiers, which as you can probably tell is very important. The medical team treats sickness that might spread, making it less likely for sickness to spread in the first place, and they also heal soldiers that have taken wounds in battle. If we manually use a soldier in battle and they are hurt, or if they take damage when they are sent out in the field automatically, they can get treated in the sickbay, and the medical team determines the level of the treatment that they get. The final team, Intel, determines how much resupply we get in the battlefield or how much support the other units get on the field. There's another very large purpose that they serve later in the game, but we'll get there down the line. At first, these teams mostly seem like they are secondary. We could probably get through most of the game pretty easily without upgrading much, but they actually become critical towards the end of the game. And outside of these pieces of management, most of Peace Walker is pretty simple. We run through small areas just like in Portable Ops, and we generally have to make it to a specific area or get out of a specific area. All of the missions in Peace Walker are organized into main ops and side ops. The main ops are the main missions of the game, split up into 5 chapters, but the side ops are all manner of different extra missions that we can take on. These have a variety of benefits to them. We can use them to gain and extract more soldiers, we can use them to get more resources, and if we get a high ranking on the mission, we can get more heroism. Heroism is a numerical representation of how far the Legend of Big Boss and the MSF group has spread. With the increase of this number, soldiers will actually volunteer to join our cause. These are basically free soldiers, and the higher our heroism, the higher the ranking of these soldiers are. Certain teams' levels will also be required to expand Mother Base, adding new platforms and areas to it. The normal gameplay of Peace Walker is actually really easy. This is mainly because the original version of the game on the PSP added a way to move the camera around. Portable Ops did not have this, but because this was meant to be a full-on Metal Gear game, they wanted this functionality in Peace Walker so that it didn't feel like going backwards. Unfortunately, the PSP doesn't have a second thumbstick to allow the player to control the camera. The solution to this problem was to allow the player to control the camera with the face buttons. Triangle would move the camera up, circle would move it right, X would move it down, and square would move it left. This solution works for the most part until we get into the boss battles, which are probably my biggest issue with the game overall. But there's an easier way to play Peace Walker because it was included in the Legacy Collection that was released on the PS3. You can actually use the thumbstick to control the camera, but because of the way the game was originally designed, with the difficulty and finicky nature of the camera control, most of the levels just become so incredibly easy. It's very simple to just stealth your way through, never getting an alert and just taking out enemies, Fulton extracting everyone you can see. It does make it kind of fun though, and S ranks become more of an attainable thing rather than something you have to work towards over a long time. And don't get me wrong, there is difficulty to Peace Walker, but we'll get there in a bit. As soon as Snake starts looking into the CIA presence in Costa Rica, he finds out they're bringing nukes into the place, because, of course, why wouldn't they be? We meet one of the Sandinista rebels named Amanda, who gives us some information on the CIA. Her father was killed, and she is now taking care of her brother Chico. Chico is pretty quickly taken captive, and we have to track him down. This leads us to a local banana factory that Amanda says is being used for drug refining. Eventually, we find a local village where Chico is being kept. Snake ends up bringing him back to Mother Base, but before that, he tells Snake that the CIA has been loading their cargo onto a train. Our next goal is to track that train down. By the time we get there, the trains have already been unloaded onto trucks, which leads us onto another trail to find the trucks. Once we find these, Snake is late once again and the nukes have already been unloaded. But making it into the main base, Snake sees 2 people arguing, a scientist named Huey Emmerich and Coldman. Huey created something, a valuable weapon for Coldman, but it was originally meant for deterrence, and now Coldman wants to launch it. We then have our first boss fight of the game. This is against the Pupa, a machine that Huey himself created. Each major boss in the game is controlled by an AI pod, which is the weak point of the machine. The Pupa specifically is like a fast-moving tank on wheels. Our goal is to hit the pod, mainly with either some form of rocket launcher, or if we run out of ammo, a machine gun. Taking down its health over time can be a pain, especially because the Pupa has a ton of tools in its arsenal. It can cast out mines that we have to destroy, or they'll shock us to death. The boss will shoot machine guns, charge at us, and use electricity to try and end Snake. We also run out of ammunition pretty quickly and will have to use some sort of resupply box to call in more ammo. This becomes standard fare moving forward because what we start the battle with is almost never enough to actually take the boss out. In general, the boss battles in this game are a huge difficulty spike compared to the rest of it. This is mainly because the boss battles were designed with co-op in mind. Peace Walker had a pretty heavy multiplayer component to it that you were definitely encouraged to use. You were supposed to be taking on the pupa with a group of friends, not solo. But obviously, since that isn't possible today, we just have to charge through it with brute force. The pupa is probably the easiest boss in the game, and the later ones will definitely test your patience a bit more, but this is where it begins. After we defeat a boss, we can pull boards out of the AI pod. Each of these boards controls a different section of the machine, and these actually tie back into another system that we'll get into at the end. After we defeat the pupa, Snake talks to Huey, who admits that he designed the weapon. He designed the ultimate weapon called Peace Walker. It was originally meant to be a deterrent, but that never works out in the end. If it wasn't obvious, Huey Emmerich is Hal Emmerich's father, and since Huey's father was involved in the Manhattan Project, he feels like he has an obligation to fight for peace. Peace Walker's final test is 5 days from now. It still isn't quite finished yet, as the AI pod needs touching up. It's currently being worked on by a Dr. Strangelove in a research lab nearby. We recruit Huey to the team and begin looking for the base. When we eventually find this base after voyaging through the jungle and rescuing some others, Snake sees the boss's horse. He is initially confused, but it seems that Strangelove had a bit of an affinity for the boss. The AI that she's working on has been crafted from her personality. That's why we heard the voice earlier on the cassette tape. We end up having to fight the next AI-controlled machine, the Chrysalis. This one is less of a tank and more of a helicopter, flying above the ground and attacking from the shadowy fog on the outskirts of the arena. Once Snake destroys it, he once again has to rip out boards from the core. This brings back old feelings that Snake has about his former mentor. He feels like he never got real closure, and neither does Strangelove. Snake has to relive killing the boss through this as well.
Why did she take that mission? How did she feel about dying? Why was I chosen?
You want to know the truth?
Ah!
The truth won't change the past. You still want to know?
No. I took on this mission for a kid who believes in peace.
Snake's next goal is now to stop the construction of Peace Walker, which leads him to a mining facility where he fights the Cocoon, a much larger AI weapon. Standing under it is actually our only course of defense against the thing. Inside this pod, Snake has a conversation with this AI-constructed boss, but him killing her was not programmed into this machine. She has no memory of it. After we destroyed this third machine, we are confronted by Coldman. He is working with the CIA and they plan to take over South America. He also adds that he was involved in the Snake Eater mission 10 years ago. He was the one in charge of planning. Snake is then taken prisoner, and while this is happening, he flashes back to the events of MGS3. When he wakes up, he's being tortured by Strangelove, who wants answers about the boss. She wants to know if she really sacrificed herself for her country, or if she was a traitor. During this sequence, we have to mash buttons to endure the torture, just like previous torture sequences in the MGS series. But damn if this isn't the most difficult and frustrating one yet. For some reason, there are 3 sections in which you have to mash the triangle button as fast as possible, and this whole thing just goes on so long. I'm honestly not one to rage at video games, but I will admit that I smashed the right thumbstick and broke a very cheap Chinese PS3 controller, forcing me to get an actual licensed Sony one to replace it. When we do get out of this sequence, we have to escape the prison, and getting out of the door isn't enough because we actually have to sneak around the guards that are outside. Once we get out and make contact with Kaz again, we find out that Paz has gone missing. Our goal, since we were captured and taken to the base, is to find the hangar and destroy Peace Walker. When we find Coldman, he's already holding Paz hostage. He has decided to launch their deterrence nuke at Snake's base because no one will miss a bunch of mercenaries. With that, Peace Walker is being launched and we have to take it down. This fight is pretty similar to the other boss battles in the game. We have to target the AI pod on the machine while avoiding Peace Walker rushing at us, trying to douse us in flame, and sending volleys of rockets our way. It's actually a pretty easy fight, but you would be wildly mistaken if you thought this was the end of the game or that this was the last boss fight, because Peace Walker actually gets away here. After we chase the machine down, it still manages to outrun us. The boss's horse dies and Coldman has taken Paz, as he thinks she has a connection to Galvez and the KGB. With Peace Walker heading to a different area so that it can launch its nuke, we have to infiltrate one final base. After a few pretty hectic missions, sneaking around places that are filled to the brim with soldiers, we finally confront Coldman. Peace Walker has been loaded with fake data because the AI was programmed to only launch a real nuke in retaliation. But the people on the other side will think nukes are actually coming their way, fooling them into making the first move. In a massive double cross though, Galvez arrives, whose real name is Zadornov. He has planned to take over the base and has been using the boss this entire time, to use him as an icon and a legend. MSF arrives at the last moment to save the day, determining that they will take Zadornov prisoner and Paz will stay with the team at Mother Base. At this time, Coldman activates the launch and all the false data is sent across the world. The people at NORAD are arguing over whether to hit the switch and retaliate before they're all wiped out. Of course, it all comes down to Snake, to take out the AI and destroy Peace Walker for good. We have another fight with the weapon, which is probably the hardest in the game, and was where my frustration with Peace Walker really came to a head. Now, Peace Walker is actually really good for what it is. I mean, most people probably emulate it these days or play it on the PS3 version, and eventually, with some hope, it'll even show up in a Master Collection at some point. But for a PSP title, this game is jam-packed with content. You could spend hundreds of hours trying to build up soldiers, unlock all of the equipment, completing every mission, every side op, and even listening to all of the cassette tapes. There's just a ton to do here, and while Portable Ops was the alpha for this idea, Peace Walker kind of feels like the beta version. I think that MGS5 would fully take this idea and run with it, but there were definitely some kinks to work out along the way. Up until this point, the game had a pretty smooth flow to it, though I did take the time and stop to do quite a lot of the extra ops in the game. It didn't really feel like they were mandatory. That was until I reached the second Peace Walker battle. If you play through the game normally, even stopping to do some extra content, there's just no way you can beat this boss with your current equipment. After a few tries, I realized that I just needed better weapons overall. It wasn't that I was doing poorly, it's that at a certain point I would just run out of ammo, even if I was placing shots well, even if I was conserving everything. This is because of the point I made before, that the boss battles were designed for multiple people, and since this is no longer possible, it's time to grind. My biggest issue was that the law that I was using just wasn't powerful enough. That meant I needed to upgrade it to rank 3. To do this, I had to drastically level up my R&D unit, but this didn't just mean grabbing random soldiers from the battlefield because most of them have pretty low skills. This meant actually targeting prisoners. We can find prisoners in many different areas and missions, and they are even more valuable because they have better skills naturally. So I found one mission that allowed me to extract one prisoner, and I figured out that I could do it in about 23 seconds or so every time. This led to me running this mission over and over and over again. Replacing the lower ranked crew members with the new ones who had better R&D skills allowed my rating to climb slowly, inching up toward the required level that I needed to develop the Law rank 3. But even when I did develop it, I realized that the development time was ages long and I would have to complete about 20 more missions for it to complete. So I ran the same mission over and over and over. Of course, I could have taken this time to complete some other side ops that I hadn't finished yet, and I did do some of those, but the grind really just took a lot of the enjoyment out of the game for me right at the end. I can't really fault the original product for this though. I think that the original version of the game was meant to be played differently. It isn't the game's fault that it hasn't been re-released and tuned for single players. But when I finally did beat Peace Walker, it was incredibly satisfying to say the least. Snake ends up calling NORAD and convincing them that the data is fake. He has to go into the AI pod and rip out the boards while the boss AI speaks, slowly devolving into gibberish. It's an auditory pain that Snake has to go through, effectively killing the boss once again. Snake eventually destroys the machine, but the AI pod takes over and walks into the lake to take itself out. This is clear proof that the sacrifice the boss made was real. When she was recreated, she still did the same thing. She ended her own existence so that others could live on. In the end, the story of Peace Walker deals a lot with Snake getting over the boss's death, the aftermath of that event, his trauma surrounding it, and living in a world without the boss's influence. It's also a game that deals with the boss's intentions as we watch those slowly devolve over time, warp and change into something new. It's effectively a game about the slippery slope towards evil. But if you know anything about Peace Walker, even though we see credits here, this isn't the real ending to the game. There's actually a whole other chapter in the game that can only be accessed under specific circumstances. After Kaz and Snake get back to Mother Base, they've accepted Paz into their ranks, Strangelove is even working with them, and Zadornov is permanently put in the brig, being kept prisoner. This soon changes as Zadornov begins escaping from Mother Base and we have to track him down. 6 separate missions take place, each broken up by periods where we think it's over, where we think he couldn't escape again. And when he escapes the last time, we're given no indication as to where he is. This is because we need to, first, trigger a set of circumstances that will allow us to even find him. One of the biggest things that I haven't talked about yet in terms of game mechanics is the Metal Gear. That's right, Peace Walker allows us to build our own Metal Gear Zeke. This is because MSF quickly realizes that they will need their own form of deterrence no matter what. Because they're growing so large, they're becoming almost a nation on their own, they will eventually be targeted. They can't just be sitting ducks. So we have to make our own Metal Gear. This is done by grabbing parts from the different AI weapons that we face in boss battles. Defeating a weapon will see us getting a variety of scrapped pieces that can be used to create head, legs, power unit, and walk. Each of these need a certain number of scrapped parts so that we can create our own version of that unit. The AI boards that we steal from various AI weapons will also be used in the AI for our Metal Gear. Once this is complete, we can actually deploy our Metal Gear, sending it to do battle in the unit fights that we send soldiers on. Creating a functional Metal Gear along with a host of other requirements like having a second platform on the base will actually trigger the final mission. When Zadornov escapes for the final time, we can actually find him hiding out in one of the very first side op missions. He's hidden above the marksmanship training area on Mother Base, something that the game gives us absolutely no indication of. When we find him, he tries to kill Snake and our hero is forced to shoot him. We then get an alert that someone has taken over Metal Gear Zeke. It turns out to be the person that we would least expect, Paz Ortega. Apparently Paz has been working with another organization this whole time, Cypher, and she clearly hints at the fact that Zero is involved with this group. Cypher, much like the Patriots, wants to control information and guide people in a certain direction. Paz offers that MSF be Cypher's boots on the ground in this mission, but Snake declines. Paz plans to use Zeke to launch a nuke at the east coast of the US. Of course, this means we have to take Zeke down. This is the actual final boss fight of the game, defeating Paz as she controls Zeke. This fight overall is such a genius move, hiding the real ending behind a bunch of secret missions that at first seem like filler, only giving the real truth behind things to the people that were determined enough to find it, and also using our own creation against us, something that we've been working towards all game, creating our own Metal Gear. Our own creation becomes our own destruction. The fight is pretty great too. Aside from the obvious tuning issues, there are 2 platforms on Mother Base, one that allows us to call an airstrike on Zeke, and the other that allows us to call in resources like ammo or rations. I gave up on using the airstrike platform pretty quickly because Zeke hits like a Mack truck, and we can be decimated really easily. My favorite way to take out the Metal Gear was just to hit it from long range while using what very little cover I had. In the end, Zeke is defeated.
Listen to me, Big Boss. As long as your army is needed, the world will never know true peace.
Paz is then ejected out of Zeke and manages to get away. In the real ending of the game, Huey and Strangelove show signs of a budding romance, hinting that she would become Otacon's mother. Kaz reveals that Paz was actually working for the KGB and Cypher. She was a triple agent the whole time. Snake and Kaz are both sort of hopeful for the future. MSF is their dream, their mercenary nation, their future. Both of them are ready to fight whatever comes their way, to fight against the times. During the post-credits scene, the two talk about Snake's feelings toward the boss. Moving forward, he refuses to lay down his gun like she did, once again misunderstanding her will and what it actually meant when she laid down her gun.
And yes, we may all be headed straight to hell. But what better place for us than this? It is our only home, our heaven and our hell. This is utter heaven.
Peace Walker as a whole is pretty fun overall. As much as I've complained about its design, I do think it works really well as a Metal Gear game for the most part. And part of this is just because of how addicting actually building your base is. Getting soldiers from the field, fitting them into your team, developing everything, and making it all work is really well done. It just feels like this big effort, the things that Big Boss would have actually been doing, overseeing something this large. But the game isn't afraid to show us the ground level of this as well, the people who made all this happen, the feeling of camaraderie and how this started as a valiant effort and slowly slid away from Big Boss. I do think the themes, ideas, and mechanics would come through a lot stronger in MGS5, but Peace Walker is definitely more overlooked than it should be. But we still have one more game to talk about before we move on to the final chapter. Sometime during the development of Peace Walker, another team at Konami began working on a spin-off for the Metal Gear series. This was originally envisioned as a game about the boss and her Cobra unit, and because Kojima was busy working on Peace Walker, he was only available in a producer role. This idea was quickly scrapped because the team found it difficult to work on the project without Kojima. Eventually, the idea was changed to feature Raiden instead and focus on his transition from MGS2 to how we see him in MGS4. This title was originally meant to be called Metal Gear Rising. Kojima Productions was hard at work on the idea, a mix of high-flying action and the stealth that Metal Gear fans had come to know and love. The project was all over the place, and eventually core members of the team had to be moved to other places in the company before the idea was scrapped and cancelled entirely. Kojima found a way to fix this though. He wasn't ready to let go of the idea entirely, and when Atsushi Inaba of Platinum Games had asked him how the Metal Gear series was going, he had the idea to bring them in to finish the work on Metal Gear Rising. The game changed drastically, and the involvement from Platinum Games obviously shifted the game into a full action game, while retaining minimal elements of stealth. When we started working with Platinum Games, they really loved the Metal Gear games, but more than that, they are really proud of their action games and have specific ideas about what they think is fun and what they think the players will really enjoy. So when they came to us with all of these ideas that were outside what we thought of as Metal Gear, and we thought, if we're doing something new, we can go that far. Actually, we have to go that far. The game's title was eventually changed to Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance and was released on February 19, 2013 for the PlayStation and Xbox 360 and on January 9, 2014 for Windows. I won't talk too incredibly long about Metal Gear Rising, mainly because the story is pretty non-canon to the Metal Gear franchise overall, and it's actually entirely different in design from the whole series. That being said, none of this means that I didn't like Metal Gear Rising. The game is actually incredibly fun and a fantastic action game. The game is set 4 years after Metal Gear Solid 4. It centers around Raiden working for a group called Maverick that acts as a security firm. It's pretty simple overall, mostly seeing Raiden go up against a PMC called World Marshal and a group of evil cyborgs that want to bring back the war that is now mostly gone from the world in the wake of the Patriots' destruction. There's some really great moments in here, like a server room full of child brains that are being trained in VR simulations constantly to create the ultimate cyborg soldiers, or the final confrontation with a nanomachine roided out senator who is badass for all the right reasons. And the action in the game is just so well done. The game completely nails the feeling that we got from seeing Raiden fight in MGS4. If you saw Raiden slinging around geckos in that game and said, "Man, I want to do that," then you're in for a good time. Most of the battle system sees us hacking and slashing, building combos, parrying and dodging enemies, all of which is standard fare for this genre. But there's a pretty cool blade mode that allows us to slow down time and slice enemies into pieces based on where we place our cuts. This can also be used to regenerate health in the heat of battle by harvesting the enemy's organs. The whole game is just insane at every moment, over the top in every way, and uses some badass music to punctuate its epic scenes of battle. It's just such a cool game, and it's the complete opposite of Metal Gear Solid 4. It's a total change of pace because it isn't really trying to take itself seriously, it's just trying to give the player a really good time. One of the only negatives of the game for me, when looked at from the overall perspective of the Metal Gear series, is that it does just kind of shit all over Metal Gear Solid 4's ending, especially when it comes to Raiden. At the end of MGS4, it sort of feels like Raiden has found peace, and then 4 years later he's back to the same old shit again. But that complaint is kind of negated by the fact that you can actually just ignore the canonicity of this game entirely. It honestly doesn't even really feel like a Metal Gear game. It's honestly just a really fun spin-off game that does action incredibly well, has a pretty decent story overall, and is just a great edgy action game. I only really included it here for the sake of comprehensiveness, but it honestly wouldn't feel right dissecting this game down to its bones, because at the end of the day, it's just cool. Metal Gear Solid 4 is such a fantastic game, and this entire era of the series just feels like it was full of experimentation. Maybe Kojima felt like he had nothing left to lose, because he wanted to try something new anyways. Why not throw everything out there, put it all on the board, and hope something works? And the fourth main game in the series is not perfect by any means necessary. It has a ton of problems with story, pacing, gameplay, etc. It can kind of be all over the place. But in my opinion, it's the first time a game in the series would go extremely personal. And I think that every single game that Kojima would make after this would follow suit. MGS5, PT, Death Stranding were all incredibly personal projects. They feel almost autobiographical, but in my opinion, that started with Metal Gear Solid 4. And you don't have to like the game at all. I can completely understand why someone wouldn't consider Metal Gear Solid 4 their favorite. But for me, it feels like it hits all of my personal favorite beats. It tells an incredibly emotional story with a lot of points that still resonate to this day. It's fun to play with a lot of new mechanics that tried to shake things up in the series. It's designed well and feels like something fresh in a series that was just starting to really hit its stride. And I always make a point to note when a series tries to go somewhere that it hasn't before, because you have to respect the ambition. Metal Gear Solid 4, though, says a lot that I think we can take away in today's world. In a culture that constantly feels like a machine that is fed and run off the blood of old creations, something that comments on that very thing 16 years prior can't not be relevant. Creating something original in today's era and just letting people sit with it feels like a foreign concept. If you have a hit in 2024, especially in games, the vultures are quickly circling before the corpses even fall into the ground. They're ready to churn that thing into sequels, remakes, spin-offs, etc., any way to make money. But it isn't even that obvious, because even if a game does well and a sequel gets made, are they ever really trying anything new? What do we get? Just the same game with a reskin and maybe a world that's 25% bigger so the marketing department has something to slap on the Game Awards trailer? Metal Gear Solid 4 found itself in a place where it didn't understand why it existed anymore. Why this old man was still trudging around the battlefield after all of these years. Was there any purpose, any reason to keep telling this story? So instead of telling another story, it told a story about that very concept. And that's the core of why I love it so much. And because that message is so interesting to me, yes, I can look past fart jokes and some mediocre bosses and some long cutscenes, because Metal Gear Solid 4 is a true enigma in the series. In the grand scheme of things, it's the one that stands out the most to me. It looks wildly different, it plays unlike any of the other games, it isn't saying the same thing as those games are. To me, it's brilliant. But this would not be the last chapter for the Metal Gear franchise. Though the game did incredibly well, and Kojima didn't even want to make it, he would end up returning for one more entry in the series, though not before being kicked off of another series and ousted from the company that he started his career at. But of course, Kojima would use that process and those feelings to give players and fans one triumphant, final goodbye. But we'll talk about that next time. Bye now.